Hey, Dan Beagleman here. The 7 modes are the Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. What gives the Ionian mode its own unique sound? Every scale, every mode is comprised of a series of steps. In other words, a chemistry or formula of the particular scale. The formula or the sequence of steps for the Ionian mode is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. What does that mean? When I hit my first note, my root note, the next note will be a whole step higher, then a whole step higher, then a half step, and then 3 more whole steps and a half step, and then I'll reach my octave and the scale is completed. I'll demonstrate using a C Ionian mode on string 2 only. In other words, I'm going to play the scale horizontally on one string. And the reason for that is so you can clearly see the sequence of steps in terms of whether I hit a whole step, which is equivalent to 2 frets, or a half step, which is equivalent to 1 fret. So again, the sequence is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And here's a C Ionian mode on string 2. Starting on string 2, fret 1, there's my C note, and after the first note, there's my starting point, my root, whole step higher, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And it sounds like this. And very clearly you can hear do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So the Ionian mode, the first mode, is actually the major scale. That's a very interesting thing. Okay, Ionian mode, major scale. And if you watch video 6 in this series, where I talk about the Aeolian mode is the natural minor scale. And if you compare the Ionian mode 1 to the Aeolian mode 6, it gets into that, using that phrase, relative major minor, where a major scale or an Ionian mode and the natural minor scale, the Aeolian mode, are the kind of two sides of the same coin. They share the same notes. I'll get into that more later in this video and also in video 6. So the Ionian mode is the same as a major scale. You want to play a C Ionian mode, play C major scale. Okay, very, very simple. There are many patterns for scales and modes all across the fingerboard, but this one I'm going to show you here is one of the ones I like to use, and I think it's a very user-friendly one. And also because this one, it starts, the lowest note is the key note, the root note here. I'll use the key of C as an example. Okay, to play this pattern for the key of C, I'm going to be in position 9. Now the 9th position would cover frets 9 through 12, thinking a finger to a fret, but on strings 6, 5, and 1, I have to pull my first finger to the left 1 fret to cover fret 8. But the fact that I'm going to be using fret 8, don't think you're in position 8, because if you are thinking that way, if your hand is in the 8th position, all these other fingers are going to be out of alignment. So set your fingers up in position 9, and then on those 3 strings, 6, 5, and 1, just pull your pull your first finger, your index finger, back to the left 1 fret. So these fingers and your thumb kind of lock you into this area, and then your first finger will do this when it needs to access the 8th or the 9th fret. Okay, here's C Ionian mode in the 9th position. And you can clearly hear, there it goes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And the nice, as I said, the nice thing about this pattern is the lowest note is the root note, C, right there. So you can, access any Ionian mode or major scale you want. You want it to be G, start on G, fret 3. But wherever you are, remember that first note is in 2 fret space. So if you, again, if I wanted to use the key of G as an example, even though G is the 3rd fret, I'm actually going to be in position 4, but then pull my first finger to the left 1 fret, and I have that open space between these first 2 fingers. Okay, the pattern I just showed you has 2 octaves and part of the 3rd octave. Here's the first octave, second octave, and then third octave. So I have 2 full octaves and then 3 notes of the 7 notes for the second octave. Okay, and the range of the scale is the root note of the lowest note, and the top note is the third tone in the scale, 1, 2. Right, so that's my range of the scale. And again, a very, very nice pattern to use because it really sits nicely in your hands, and starting and ending on the root note, you can clearly hear the Ionian mode, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Some people might think that the Ionian mode is somewhat of a boring scale to use in terms of for soloing and improvising, but that's actually very untrue. What you do with it is really what matters. Okay, so as an example, the pattern I just showed you, right? C Ionian mode, C major scale. If you just played it in order of the notes like that laid out, obviously it's going to sound like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and it's not going to be very interesting. But if you just mix the notes up in different orders, you can come up with an infinite amount of ideas. And the Ionian mode can be used in different contexts. For example, here in a softer, jazzier type of context, I'll just play a line, I'll mix up these notes, and I'll get something like this. Okay? It's kind of a pretty sounding line, and everything I played came right out of that scale pattern I had showed you. Like I said, it's just mixing up the notes in different orders, and you can really create some interesting lines. A little later in this video, I'll show you how to use the Ionian mode more in a rock context, so it's not limited to just soft, pretty, jazzier type applications. Here's another pattern for the Ionian mode, and this pattern I think is a little bit more applicable for rock music, or in a rock type setting, rock pop music, where the first pattern I showed you I think sits better in a jazzier type setting. Not to discount though that you can use any pattern in any type of music, but it's a matter of how the fingers lay out and what just seems to really sit nicely in your hands for the particular genre that you're playing in. Okay, here's pattern number 2. I'll use the key of E to demonstrate. I'm going to play an E Ionian mode. In this pattern, the root note will be on string 6, but I'll be using my 4th finger, not my 1st finger, as in the first pattern. And I'll be in position 9, but there's one note that will have to be played outside that position. Position 9 covers frets 9 through 12, but there's one note, the 7th degree, which is the D sharp, that has to be played either to the 8th fret on string 3 or the 13th fret on string 4. I'll show you both patterns. Here's E Ionian mode, first way. You'll notice on string 4 I stretched my pinky out 1 fret because I needed to get that D sharp note. If I didn't stretch, I'd have a D natural, and that would not be the Ionian mode. If I play this note on string 4 with my pinky stretched out, which is D sharp, there's also a D sharp on string 3 if I go back 1 fret to the 8th fret. So here's the other option for fingering. Okay, so in that particular pattern, the 7th degree of the scale, the D sharp, you can get it by stretching your pinky to the right 1 fret or stretching your first finger to the left 1 fret on string 3. Okay, either or will work. Now, what's really, really nice, as I mentioned, how this particular pattern really sits well in a rock type setting, and rock, blues, whatever the case may be. I'm sure you all know this E chord, or major chord, and I'm using in the 7th fret. It's an E major chord, and this chord generated from the open A chord, right? And if I just bar that up, A sharp, B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, all the way up to E. Okay, I have if I look at the notes I'm playing, I have a root note, I have a 5th, I have a root note again, and a 3rd. Root, 5, root, 3, and makes up my major triad. If I just play the notes that I'm pressing with or holding with my 3rd finger, I have an E major chord in the second inversion, the fifth, the root, and the third. 5, 1, 3. Now what's interesting about this, watch this. E major chord, and the low note is the E or the root note. If I switch my third finger with my first finger, same chord, just using a different finger, but now if I put my third finger on string 5, now I have an octave lower as a third, an octave lower than on string 2. So this is an E chord with a third in the bass. The third tone in the scale is my low note. E chord with the E in the bass. E chord with the third in the bass. And the reason I brought this up is because you can clearly see that scale I just showed you, that Ionian mode pattern. It's right here. So you can see a lot of things, you've probably heard things like this, Hendrix type stuff. Right? It just sits right here. So it's a really nice connection there. If you're playing in the key of E, E major of course, and you play your chord this way with your third in the bass, you have all these things you can have right there from the Ionian mode kind of jumping out at you. Okay? Also, I mentioned about connecting the mode to the correct pentatonic scale and the correct blues scale. Now, there are two types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and there are two types of blues scales, major and minor, and obviously you have to use the correct one. The Ionian mode is a major sounding mode because it has a major third. Remember, a chord, a major chord, your basic major triad, has the first, third, and fifth degrees of the scale. So if I play the first note, the third note, and the fifth note, there's an E major chord, which shows that the Ionian mode is a major sounding mode. Okay, and because of that, it will connect with a major pentatonic and a major blues scale. Here's an E major pentatonic scale in the same position. Right, and here's an E major blues scale. The pentatonic scale, remember, is a 5-tone scale. The major blues scale is a 6-tone scale. It's a major pentatonic with a flat third added in, which acts as a passing tone to the natural third. Root, second, flat 3, natural 3. And there is it again. Okay, here's all three scales together. E Ionian mode, or E major scale. E major pentatonic scale. E major blues scale. You can see so many similarities, or so many notes are in both of these scales. All of the notes in the major pentatonic scale are in the Ionian mode. 5 of the 6 notes in the blues scale are in the Ionian mode. It's that flat third, this note here, which acts as that, again, as that passing tone between the second and the third. If you hung on that note for a while against an E major chord, it would sort of clash a little bit because this is a minor third, which would turn a chord into a minor chord, but as a passing tone, it works as again, it passes through from the second to the third. It makes a little bridge between those two notes. The difference between the pentatonic scale and the Ionian mode is this. If I look at the pentatonic scale, the degrees from the Ionian mode, in other words, the Ionian mode, being a major scale, has 7 tones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? The pentatonic scale is 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So a pentatonic scale is like an Ionian mode or a major scale, leaving out the 4th and the 7th degree. The 4th degree is the A note from the key of E. So the pentatonic scale doesn't have that and doesn't have the 7th. The reason I mention this is now, like any of the modes, when you mix modes with the pentatonic scale, it's those two notes that are in the mode that are not in the pentatonic scale that really give the mode its unique characteristic sound and really, just distinguish it from the straight up pentatonic scales. Pentatonic scale. Right? And it sounds good as well. There's the fourth. Right? It kind of makes it a little bit prettier sounding. So the Ionian Mode, again, is like the pentatonic scale, but adding those two extra notes in there, which really kind of gives a different color or a different, flavor to the mode. So you can, again, just reviewing this again real quick, in any position, if I lay my hands out like this, I can, or let's say starting with a chord, like here's a C chord. Switch that up to with the third and the bass, I have this, and then right here I have C Ionian Mode, I have C pentatonic scale, C major pentatonic, and C major blues scale. And it's a pretty chord, it's a very pretty sounding chord when you play a major chord with the third and the bass. Chord with the root in the bass, chord with the third in the bass. Okay, so a lot to see here in terms of the mode and how it connects to the chord and also connects with the correct pentatonic and blues scales. I showed you earlier in the video just creating a jazzier type of a line from the Ionian Mode in that first pattern that I showed you. But I did say that you can use the Ionian Mode for soloing in more of like a rock context. Now, being that the Ionian Mode is a major sounding mode, it's not going to be good for any kind of heavy music. You're not going to use it in Iron Maiden or Metallica, things like that. Unless, of course, the song is in a major key, like a softer type of a tune. But a good use of the Ionian Mode in a soloing situation is the song Blue Sky by the Allman Brothers Band. I imagine most people out there are familiar with the Allman Brothers Band. And a lot of their tunes were in major keys and kind of happier sounding, if you will, use that expression, like happy sounding, okay? The solo, these extended guitar solos like in Blue Sky, really make use of the Ionian Mode very nicely. The solo section of Blue Sky is just two chords, E and A. E. Just a bar of E and a bar of A, back and forth. And the solo is completely built on the Ionian Mode in the key of E. Here's a bit of the guitar solo from Blue Sky. And on and on and on. So everything I played is in the E Ionian Mode, and whenever I was in the ninth position here, coming off of that pattern, of course some string bending. Sometimes I would bend this second degree here to the major third, and sometimes actually to the fourth, which would be bending it 1.5 steps. But as you can see, a really nice example of using the Ionian Mode in a rock or a softer rock type setting is the Ionian Mode. Here's another example of using the Ionian Mode to create a signature iconic guitar riff. Staying with the band the Allman Brothers, the song Ramblin' Man, I imagine everybody on the planet, or almost, has heard this tune. That's the intro to Ramblin' Man. It's in the key of G, and it uses that second pattern I showed you, G Ionian Mode. So it has a very singing quality to it. The Ionian Mode in a major key, yes, it really just sings, like kind of a very happy kind of a sound to it. So Ionian Mode, lots of uses for it. It's not as dull as you may think. The Allman Brothers Band made good use of the Ionian Mode to create harmony guitar lines when the song is in a major key. I'll show you how this works. The second pattern for the Ionian Mode I showed you, using E as an example, E Ionian Mode in position 9. If I play that pattern, I see that there are 3 root notes and there are 3 E notes. The 6th string first finger, the 3rd string first finger, and the 1st string pinky. Okay? If I start on that center root note, string 3, finger 1, if I just play a simple little line, so I just moved up 4 notes in the scale, 1, 2, 3, came back to the 7th and returned to the root. Okay? If I want to harmonize to that, I can do what's called 1-3 harmony, because I'm going to harmonize from the 3rd note of the scale. Go to the 3rd note and start here, and I'm going to just follow the same sequence. In other words, I went up 4 notes from the first line, 1, 2, 3, 4, turned around, back to where I started from, 1 note below that, and return. And now I'll just start on the 3rd note in the scale, and I'll mimic that same movement. 4 notes up, return, 1 lower, and then back. So guitar 1, guitar 2. And when you put that together, it's going to sound like this. So that's called 1-3 harmony, because there's the root note and then the 3rd. Remember, a major chord has 1, 3, and 5. So you can have 1-3 harmony, which I just showed you, and I'll show you 1-5 harmony. Again, guitar 1 plays the same thing. And now instead of guitar 2 playing the 3rd note, I'm going to play the 5th note, start on the 5th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and again I'm going to follow that same sequence. Go up 4 notes, come back, 1 below where I started from, and back. So guitar 2 would be guitar 1, guitar 2. And if I put that together, it's going to sound like this. So that's 1-5 harmony. So you can have 1-3 harmony, 1-5 harmony. And again, this is all just coming out of the Ionian Mode. You can also have 3-5 harmony, which is really the same as 1-3 harmony, just superimposed up a little bit. So the main thing to consider is, if you want to harmonize 1-3 harmony, whatever guitar 1 plays, guitar 2 starts 2 notes higher in that same scale and then mimics the same zigzagging pattern in the scale. Whatever guitar 1 plays, you play 2 notes ahead of it. And if you want 1-5 harmony, it's 4 notes above. Guitar 1 plays this, and guitar 2 goes 4 notes in the scale above it, and then whichever zigzag pattern guitar 1 plays, guitar 2 would play that. So 1-3 harmony and 1-5 harmony based on the Ionian Mode, and that will work great for major chords. Again, the Allman Brothers Band being a good example of making use of that. Now also, if you watch my video number 6 on the Aeolian Mode, the same concept can apply in a minor situation. Bands like Iron Maiden with 2 guitar players, but more in a rock metal context, and a lot of songs are in minor keys. The 6th mode, the Aeolian Mode, is the natural minor scale, and the exact same idea applies. 1-3 harmony, 1-5 harmony. And again, the relationship of these 2 modes, the Ionian Mode and the Aeolian Mode, is relative major minor. That concept, relative major minor, 2 sides of the same coin. The Ionian Mode is the same as a major scale. The Aeolian Mode is the same as a natural minor scale. So if I play a C scale, I have all natural notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. If I play an A natural minor scale, I have all natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. So because of that concept, think of it as like two sides of the same coin. Major scale or Ionian mode here, Aeolian mode or natural minor scale here, the exact same notes. The only difference is if you're looking at it from the perspective of the Ionian mode, you would have the pattern whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half from the first note. And if you flipped it over to the Aeolian mode, you would have the pattern for the Aeolian mode. So check out video number 6 on the Aeolian mode for the same concept applied with dual guitar harmony in a minor mode context. Now I'll just play a little bit to demonstrate using the Ionian mode mixed with the major pentatonic and the major blues scales. I'll use the key of E to demonstrate. Why does the Dorian mode sound the way it does? Every scale or mode is made up of a sequence or a pattern of steps. Sometimes whole steps, half steps, and even occasionally 1.5 steps. Remember, a step is 2 frets and a half step is 1 fret. So the pattern or sequence for Dorian mode is whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. Say that 5 times fast. So to demonstrate, I'll show you a Dorian mode on 1 string. If I hit I'll use the string 5 to demonstrate, since it's an A note, the A Dorian mode on string 5. A note. Now, a whole step higher, a half step higher, a whole step higher, a whole step, a whole step, a half step, and a whole step again. So I have, and if I start on any note and follow that sequence, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, I'll be playing a Dorian mode. Now if I look at that pattern that I just played, the Dorian mode on the 5th string, there's 2 things I can take away from that. Look at the notes I'm playing. A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A. Okay? So I have 6 natural notes and 1 sharp, F sharp. What does that tell me? The key of G has an F sharp in it. So an A Dorian mode is actually like a G major scale, except starting on the 2nd tone or the 2nd degree of the G scale. Here's a G major scale. You know, regular do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. G, A, B. Right? But if I play the same scale, the same pattern, but start on the 2nd degree, which is A, it's going to sound like this. So the A Dorian mode is actually a G scale, just starting on the 2nd degree. Listen to this. Here's a G chord. Here's a G scale. Now here's an A minor chord, and I'm going to play the A Dorian mode, which is again a G major scale starting on the 2nd degree. Here's the A minor chord, and here's the A Dorian mode. Sounds like it matches with that chord. So it's very interesting to see that. And the takeaway from that is you can just think, okay, if I want to play a Dorian mode, I can just play a major scale a whole step under the key that I'm playing in, because G is a whole step under A. So you think this real quickly. If I'm in A and I want Dorian mode, a whole step under A is G. So again, if I'm in A, play a G scale. But focus on the 2nd degree of the scale, because you want to know that that's the center, or the key center of the scale. You don't want to, if you're playing an A minor chord and you play the starting and ending on G, still sounds like an Ionian mode or a major scale. But again, if I play the A minor chord and I play just a G scale, but starting on the second degree, starting and ending on the second degree, I have, and it just sits right in there and matches perfectly. So an A Dorian mode is a G major scale, but starting and ending or focusing on the second degree as your key note. Now another way to look at the Dorian mode is to think of it in terms of relating to a minor scale, because it's a minor sounding mode. An A natural minor scale has all natural notes. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. That's your A minor scale. An A Dorian mode has an F sharp. So I can also think of a Dorian mode as a natural minor scale with a raised sixth tone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the sharp sixth. So two ways to think of a Dorian mode. It's a natural minor scale with a raised sixth tone, or it could be looked at as a major scale played one whole step under the key, but focused, as I said before, focusing on the second degree as your key center. There are many patterns across the fingerboard for playing modes, scales, and there are some that are more user-friendly. I tend to like this one I'm about to show you for many, many reasons, especially how it will lock in with pentatonic and blues scales. Again, later in the video, I'll demonstrate that. Here's an A Dorian mode in position 7. That means I'm covering frets 7 through 10. Think of a finger to a fret. And I'm going to start on the string 4 with my first finger, string 4, fret 7, first finger. The reason I'm starting on that note is because that's an A note. I'll cover the entire range vertically in that particular area. The lowest note is going to be B, which is the second tone in the scale. The highest note is going to be D, which is the fourth tone in the scale. So again, I want to start and end on the A note, and that helps me to really hear. It helps your ear to identify the key center, you know, the center of the scale. Okay, here's an A Dorian mode in position 7. If I just went back one note, which is G, and started and ended here, as I mentioned before, an A Dorian mode is the same as a G scale as far as the notes that it contains. You'll hear very strikingly how you can hear the difference. Same thing I just played, but I'm going to start and end on this. You know, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So it's amazing how just starting on the different note, you know, just changes the whole thing up. And that's because the chemistry or the sequence of the steps, as I mentioned earlier, the sequence of the whole steps and half steps, that's what makes one scale sound different than another one. So again, A Dorian mode, position 7, starting and ending on this A note. And another nice thing about this particular pattern is, if I think of it in for practicing, I can think of it in terms of 8 sets of 16th notes, and then on the 9th beat, if you will, it will, you know, end. So I'm going to count beats out as I play this, and like I said, it's very, very sequenced. It sits very, very nicely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and I'll just reverse it. I'll start on this same A note. I'll go to the lowest note, to the highest note, and return back to that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Great for practicing, and like I said, it's very, very sequenced, and it just really, really sits nicely. So if you put a metronome on, great for your hands, and also getting the scale in your hands, because, you know, use that expression, muscle memory. You want to get these scales in your hands and in your head so you don't have to think about it, and then when you're using it in a playing situation, it'll just be as natural as the basic pentatonic scales that everybody's probably playing. When using any particular mode or scale, you have to take into consideration where you're using it. Remember, there are major chords, minor chords, dominant chords, and then of course keys. There are major keys and minor keys. Not every mode is going to work in every particular situation, obviously. So the Dorian mode I think of as a minor mode, and what do I mean by that? Again, if I played in A Dorian mode, if I take the first, third, and fifth degree, because chords are built on basic triads, you know, your basic minor or major triad is the first, third, and fifth degree of a scale. So if I take the first note, the third note, and the fifth note, which is A, C, E, what does that tell me? That's an A minor chord. So because the Dorian mode contains the root note, the minor third of A, and an E note, 1 flat 3 5 in the key of A, that tells me that the Dorian mode is going to work with A minor chords, or in the key of A minor. Now, putting the Dorian mode to use in a real playing situation. As I mentioned, the Dorian mode I think of as a minor mode because it has a minor third in it, so it will sit nicely over minor chords or in a minor key, but not every single playing situation or genre of music. The Dorian mode, in my opinion, is great for rock, again, in a minor key. Rock, some jazz rock, maybe even a little jazz, if you will. Not so great for, again, it's just my opinion, metal or heavy metal type music. There are other modes that will sit better in those, and I'll get to those in other videos. The Phrygian Mode, the Locrian Mode, and then exotic scales, which I'll cover in other videos, like harmonic minor scales and variations on harmonic minor scales. That being said, looking at the Dorian mode, what will it really work well with? Okay, let's say I take a chord pattern like a 1-4 pattern, like let's say A minor 7 to D9. And if I play this cycle, like a Santana kind of a thing, you know, Evil Ways or stuff like that. Carlos Santana uses the Dorian mode a lot. And the reason why it sits so nicely right in there is because here's an A minor 7th chord, so I'm in a minor key. Dorian mode right there. When I go to the 4 chord and play D ninth, if you look at this chord, there's an F sharp in there, right? So that F sharp, remember I talked about earlier, that the Dorian mode has an F sharp in it, so it's a perfect fit. A minor. Okay, Dorian mode, Santana. You want to sound like Carlos Santana? Use a Dorian mode. Okay, let's say, you know, Light My Fire by the Doors. Remember that extended guitar solo? That's built on just 2 chords, A minor 7, B minor 7. When he gets to the B minor 7, if you look on string 2, hey, there's an F sharp again, right? Because if I played a natural minor scale over this, if I went, that's an A natural minor scale, it has an F natural note. That F natural note is going to clash with the B minor 7, which has an F sharp note in it. Not to get too deep in the woods theory-wise, but again, as you can see, this Dorian mode just sits so nicely in some of these situations. That beginning to the Light My Fire guitar solo, it has that F sharp in there. So again, Dorian mode, great. You want to sound like Santana? Play Dorian mode. You want to sound like Robbie Krieger on Light My Fire? Dorian mode. You want to sound like Duane Allman and Dickie Betts? Dorian mode. Those extended guitar solos on those, you know, Elizabeth Reed and Whipping Post and all of those great Allman Brothers songs, so much of the guitar soloing is built on the Dorian mode mixed with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scales. One of the cool things you can do with the modes is mix them with the pentatonic and or blues scales. Remember, there are 2 types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and 2 types of blues scales, major and minor. Being that there are 7 modes, each one of them will be either a minor type or a minor sounding mode and or a major sounding mode. And then I can mix that with the correct pentatonic and or blues scale. The Dorian mode, being that it has a minor third, and we talked about that earlier, is a minor sounding mode. That means I can mix it up with a minor pentatonic scale and or a minor blues scale. Again, using the key of A to demonstrate, Here's that A minor, I'm sorry, here's that A Dorian mode that we were working on earlier. Position 7, fret 7 to 10. If I shoot back to position 5, and I'm in now covering frets 5 through 8, here's the basic minor pentatonic scale that I imagine everybody knows. And the minor blues scale. Okay, now if I combine these scales together, I can get a lot out of it in terms of a wider range, a wider area of the fingerboard that I'm covering, and just a lot more going on musically. To demonstrate, here's an A minor pentatonic scale, and the next note, the next root note, because remember a pentatonic scale is a 5-tone scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 6th note in the scale is the root note or the octave for the root note for the 2nd octave. Okay, so now instead of getting that with my 3rd finger, I'm going to get that with my 1st finger, so I'm going to shift up 2 frets. Shift up. What did that do? It now put me in the position for that Dorian mode. Okay, so now I'm connecting the lower half of the pentatonic, the minor pentatonic scale, and the higher part, or the higher, a little more than a half, of the Dorian mode. So now putting that all together, going up and down, I'll start on the lowest note of the pentatonic scale. Shift up. So I'm mixing up part of the pentatonic scale and part of the Dorian mode. And again, if you want to use a glissando or slide to connect them together, it's a little nicer sounding too. Like that. So what you can do is you can look at the strings and the fingering on whatever string you're on, and you can use that same, if the same finger applies, you can use that as a bridge to slide, to the next scale, or the Dorian mode from the pentatonic. In other words, the pentatonic scale, if let's say I use string 2, has fingers 1 and 4, and the Dorian mode also has the 4th finger on string 2, so I can use that and slide there. Or the 1st finger. So whichever finger is the same, or between these two scales, the pentatonic minor and the Dorian, if the same finger on any particular string is being used, that finger can be used as a glissando, as a slide, or a bridge to connect the two scales together. And again, when you put this all together, you are now covering a wider range of the fingerboard and making use of 2 types of scales, the pentatonic and the blues scale being a little bit more like rock blues sounding, if you will, and the pentatonic, in the Dorian mode being a little bit more jazz rock sounding, Mixing these two together will give you so much information musically, so many, just so much stuff to play. And as I said earlier, the Allman Brothers, so much of these guitar solos, like on Whipping Post and Elizabeth Reed, these extended jams make use of mixing minor pentatonic and Dorian mode. And again, there's obviously other patterns for all of these scales across the fingerboard, but just making use of these 2 common patterns will give you a wealth of material to play. So again, connect the minor pentatonic or minor blues scale with the Dorian mode in position 7, and you have a tremendous amount of material to work with. Now I'll just demonstrate playing a little bit, mixing the Dorian mode with the minor pentatonic and minor blues scales. I'll use the key of A as an example. What makes the Phrygian mode sound the way it does? Why does it sound different than other scales and other modes? Every mode or scale has a chemistry or a formula to it. It's a sequencing of steps. A whole step is equivalent to 2 frets. A half step is equivalent to 1 fret. So the sequence or the pattern for a Phrygian mode is half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. And what does that mean? I'll demonstrate an E Phrygian mode on the low E string. E. There you go. There's your root note. My next note is a half step higher, which is 1 fret, then a whole step higher, which is 2 frets. And then following that sequence, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. Okay? It means I just, after the first note, I played a half step higher or 1 fret, then 2 frets, 2 frets, 2 frets, 1 fret, 2, and followed that sequence. Because of that, from starting for that first note and following that sequence, I get the sound of the Phrygian mode. Every scale, every mode has just a different arrangement of half steps, whole steps, and sometimes even 1.5 steps. Now, in that Phrygian mode pattern that I just played, there's some interesting things to see in there. Here's the pattern again. What do we see here? There's no sharps and no flats. All natural notes. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. What key or scale has no sharps or no flats? C. The key of C, the C major scale, which is also the C Ionian mode, has all natural notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So an E Phrygian mode has the same notes as a C major scale or an E Ionian mode. Okay? If you take this a little further, if you look at this from this perspective, if I'm thinking E and I want to use the Phrygian mode, I know the Phrygian mode now is a C major scale. Okay? Here's a C major scale. Okay? Now, the E Phrygian mode, the difference between that and the C Ionian mode is what is the key center, the root note that I want to focus on. Because if I play an Ionian mode, if I use C as my key center, the pattern is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If I start on the E note, the third note in the C major scale, my pattern changes to half, whole, 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 half, whole, half, whole, whole. That's why this scale sounds different, even though I'm using the same notes. So here's a C major scale playing from C to C. Okay? Here's the same scale, but I'm just going to start in the 3rd degree, E, and just go E to E and return all natural notes. And there's an E chord, an E5 chord, E major chord, if you will. You can hear the difference. It's striking. C chord, C major scale. E5 chord, E Phrygian mode. Okay? Big difference between the two. So, you can think of a Phrygian mode as playing a major scale 2 whole steps under your key. The reason I like to use it or think that way, and I use this with a lot of students that I have, is you can memorize a whole different fingering patterns for many scales, but if you just know a basic major scale pattern, you can just apply the principle to think, okay, well, if I want to use a Phrygian mode, play a whole step under, 2 whole steps under. If you watched the previous video on the Dorian mode, the same principle applies. It's 1 whole step under. So if I'm in the key of E and I want to play a Dorian mode, it's a whole step under. I'll just play a D scale. If I want to play Phrygian mode from E, I'll just play C scale, 2 whole steps under. It's an interesting way to look at these modes, or quick way to access them. But again, the key thing to pay attention to is, if you're thinking that it's a C major scale, which it is, don't focus on C as the key center of the scale. Focus on E, which is the 3rd tone or the 3rd degree of the scale. E Phrygian is a C major scale, but the 3rd degree of the scale, which is E, is your nucleus of the scale, or center point, or whatever. Sometimes I like to use the analogy of the sun and the planets. the sun is the key center, so in this case it's E, and the planets revolve around the sun, the notes in the C scale will revolve around this E note as the key center, as opposed to the C as the key center. Makes sense, right? Here I'll demonstrate that idea again of the Phrygian mode. I'll use the fifth string A in this case, okay? So same idea, open fifth string A, and following that pattern, half whole, 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 half whole, whole. That's an A Phrygian mode on note one string. If I look at the notes I just played, I have all natural notes except B is now B flat because of that half step from A. So an A Phrygian mode has a B flat in it. What scale or key has a B flat? The answer is the key of F. The key of F or an F scale has a B flat. If I use A as my key center, and now with that formula, as I mentioned before, or the way to look at it, 2 whole steps under to get a Phrygian mode. From A, 2 whole steps under is F. So A Phrygian is an F scale. Just focus on the third degree of the F scale. Focus on the third degree of the F scale as the A note. There you go. Okay, here's an F major scale in position 5. Okay, sounds like an F chord. Now if I play the same pattern with the B flat, I'll just start and end on A. Sounds like a whole different thing. A Phrygian is F major. Just focus on the third degree of the F scale, which is A. Now, talking about the A Phrygian mode again, or any Phrygian mode for that matter, there's another way you can view Phrygian modes by relating them to the natural minor scale, because the Phrygian mode is a minor sounding mode. You're going to use that for minor keys, minor chords. Here's an A natural minor scale. All natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Okay, that's A natural minor. Now, if I played the A Phrygian mode, remember I have to have a B flat. So the difference is the Phrygian mode is a natural minor scale with a flat second degree. A natural minor has A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, and A Phrygian is A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G, A, and back. And this difference when you go from A to B flat as opposed to B for the second note is that half step. That really gives the characteristic sound of the Phrygian mode. It makes it sound the way it does. So that B flat, that half step, again, that really jumps out at you and it says, it screams, hey, I'm in the Phrygian mode, I'm the Phrygian mode. Okay? Very cool stuff, right? There are many positions for playing scales and modes across the fingerboard, of course, but here's a, I'd like to say, a user-friendly one, and one that, you know, is pretty much a go-to, I imagine, for a lot of guitar players who know this stuff. Here's a Phrygian mode in the 12th position using the key of E as an example, and of course, the lowest note, first finger, fret 12, is your key center, your E note. Okay, E Phrygian mode, position 12. Has 3 key centers, 3 root notes, E, E. Okay, so again, remember it's a C scale, just starting on E. Here's a C scale in position 12. Doesn't sound like a Phrygian mode, but now okay, now it sounds like a Phrygian mode. So again, it highlights that stark difference between the two, and that half step makes a big difference going up, you know, from the first degree to the second degree. So again, a very user-friendly pattern for the Phrygian mode. And of course, you know, Anywhere you want to start, first finger, sixth string. You want to play G Phrygian, here's G, A Phrygian, B flat Phrygian, whatever the case may be. The Phrygian mode is considered a minor mode. And why is that? Remember, there are three families of chords. There are major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. The basic chord, the basic three-part chord, the triad, will determine whether a chord or scale is major or minor. You take the first, third, and fifth degree of the scale, and that will give you the answer. If I take the first, third, and fifth note of this E Phrygian mode, I have E is the root or 1, the third note is G, the fifth note is B. So E, G, and B gives me an E minor chord. And because of that, it's quite obvious this will work for minor chords and minor keys. Now, of the 7 modes, there are 4 minor sounding modes, 2 major sounding modes, and 1 dominant sounding mode. Because there are 4 minor modes, the previous video that I did on the Dorian mode is a minor mode, and then there's this one, Phrygian, and Aeolian, which is the same as the natural minor scale, and the Locrian mode. So there are 4 minor modes that come out of the diatonic scale. Which one should you use? That depends on what you're playing. The Dorian mode, again, the video that I did before this, in my opinion, is much better suited for rock and jazz rock, some jazz in minor keys. But let's say for guitar players, what do you want to sound like? The Dorian mode is pretty much, you want to sound like Carlos Santana, play the Dorian mode. You want to sound like Duane Allman and Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers Band on those extended jams like Whipping Post and Elizabeth Reed, use the Dorian mode mixed with the minor pentatonic scale and the minor blues scale because they're minor modes. Okay? The Phrygian mode, which we're talking about here, in my opinion, is better suited for well, like jazz rock, fusion, neoclassical type stuff. They use that phrase. Heavy shredding type guitar players like to use this. Great guitar players like Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen. This Phrygian mode is definitely in their toolbox. And again, mixing this up with the correct pentatonic and blues scales, I'll get to that in a little bit in this video, will give you a tremendous amount of material to work with. So again, Phrygian mode is a minor mode, and it's going to work great for shredding, jazz rock fusion, this neoclassical type stuff. Anything in a minor key and very, very heavy music it works great for. The modes are often used for soloing and improvising, but they can also be used for composing music, composing head riffs to songs, recognizable signature guitar lines. Here's a perfect example in a jazz rock fusion setting. If you're familiar with guitarist John McLaughlin, who had a group called the Mahavishnu Orchestra in the 70s, real jazz rock, heavy, wild music. Their debut album, The Intermounting Flame, the opening track, was a song called Meeting of the Spirits. And that song is in the key of F sharp, and the signature line that the bass is playing, the violin is doubling it, is built on the Phrygian mode. Okay, song is in the key of F sharp. Here's an F sharp Phrygian mode. 3 keynotes in this scale. The first note on the 6th string, the lowest note, F sharp, F sharp, F sharp, and it starts on the middle root note. Again, the song is in F sharp. The timing is 6/4, and the riff is built on the Phrygian mode in a pattern descending in groups of 3. Very, very cool. Watch. Root note, and then I'm going to go 3 notes down in the Phrygian mode. Then start on the next note, which is G, 3 notes down, A note, and return. And that sits very nicely over this half-step change, like F sharp to G. So when you have that F, a chord and then a half step up and back, very, very heavy, very dark sounding, your Phrygian Mode is like a perfect thing to play over that. Again, if you're not familiar with John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, definitely worth checking it out. Some great, great music, some great, great musicians. There's another pattern for the Phrygian Mode that I really like to use a lot and find it very, very useful. I'll show you how this works. Remember the first pattern that I showed you earlier, using E as a key center, starting at fret 12. Okay, that's in position 12, covers frets 12 through 15. This pattern is in position, for the same key for E, is in position 14, covering frets 14 through 17, but also will use the 13th fret on string 6 and string 1. So on 6 and 1, I'm going to stretch my first finger back to the left 1 fret. So it's going to encompass a 5 fret span. And here's the E Phrygian Mode in the 14th position, but starting on the 13th fret. And in this case, the first note, or the lowest note, is F, which is the second degree of that scale. But here's the cool thing. If I just use that first E note, like from the first pattern, and then just shift up a half step and play this new pattern and then return back to that, I have this. And what I like about that is because I get that half step shift. So connecting these two patterns together, very, very cool thing. And of course, by the second pattern will give you one higher note there, so it extends the range a little bit of the scale as well. I'm sure there are plenty of Jeff Beck fans out there, myself included. I had the pleasure of meeting Jeff some years ago at a concert at Jones Beach Theater in Long Island, New York. At the time I was doing guitar transcriptions for Alfred Music Publishing Company, and one of the projects I had worked on was Jeff's album, Who Else? So he was on tour supporting that album, on tour with a second guitarist, Jennifer Batten, in place of the keyboard player. She was using a guitar synthesizer kind of a setup, so it replaced the keyboards. It was a great concert, no doubt. I also had happened to have gotten the book just a few days prior to the show, you know, the transcription book that I did for that album, so I was able to bring the book with me, and that was great because I got backstage and got to meet Jeff, and I showed him the book. And I'll paraphrase, he said something like, when he was thumbing through it, like, holy shit, that's some serious stuff you're doing there. Meaning like, wow, to write out the music on this album and, you know, to be able to put it down on paper, some mad skills you got, something like that. Anyway, very humbling to meet Jeff, and just seemed like a very, very down-to-earth guy, and he will definitely be missed for a long time for many of us. He was taken way too soon. The reason that I bring up Jeff Beck is to show you another example of using the Phrygian Mode in a compositional context. Anybody familiar with Jeff's music, you know his first instrumental album, Blow by Blow, which came out in 1975, I believe. One of the tunes on there is called Scatterbrain. Scatterbrain is in the key of B flat minor, and it's in 9/8 time. The main riff is in 9/8 time. The chord sequence, when the solos come up, it goes to 4/4, and then there's this chord dissension at the end of each phrase or each section, which I guess is in 3/4 time. Anyway, back to Scatterbrain. The main riff being, like I said, the Phrygian Mode. When I showed you earlier the two Phrygian Mode patterns, one starting on E, and then one moving up a half step. The reason that works nicely together, and I'll show you how this relates to Scatterbrain now. Again, Scatterbrain, B flat minor, okay? So if I play a B flat Phrygian here, but now if I play it the second pattern where I shift up a half step, okay? Scatterbrain starts on the 5th tone of the Phrygian Mode. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is F. F is the 5th of B flat. Okay, taking that in taking into account that second pattern, I'm here. So my first finger is on this F note, and against this B flat minor chord, here's the main riff in 9/8 time. Okay, chord. Next chord, and I might as well stay with this tune. The second chord in the tune is looks like an A augmented with a B bass. Same riff, nothing changes. Then the third chord is D with a C bass, and then he takes up that same line going up a half step. Then it goes E with a D bass, then takes that line up a whole step, and the last chord is G with G major 7. And here the fingering changes a little bit to something like, looks like a Lydian line. And my next video is on Lydian Mode. So that's the chord sequence. It's a 5-chord sequence: B flat minor 7, then A augmented with a B bass, D over C, E over D, G major 7. But all the first 4 lines, like I showed you, are based off the Phrygian mode, starting on the 5th of the mode, or the 5th of the scale. And then just at the end of each cycle, you have this, which is B flat with an A flat bass, and then it descends down in minor thirds, or go down 3 frets. And when the solos come up, which it switches to 4/4 time, they stay with that same chord sequence, that same 5-chord sequence. So again, you can see that the Phrygian mode is being put to use here to compose the head riff to Scatterbrain. Cool stuff, right? You can always mix the modes with the correct pentatonic and or blues scale to get more out of your playing. Remember, there's 3 types of modes, in a sense, characteristics, if you will. There are minor type modes, major type modes, and a dominant type mode, based on the diatonic scale. Because the Phrygian mode is a minor sounding mode, it obviously will mix with a minor pentatonic and or a minor blues scale. Staying with the key of B flat, like I was just playing Scatterbrain, here's a B flat Phrygian mode. Here's a B flat minor pentatonic scale. Here's a B flat minor blues scale. Now it's obvious that there are a lot of common notes between these 3 scales. But what happens is, or the difference is, the pentatonic and the blues scales will give you more like a rock blues type sound. But when you mix in especially that second note in the Phrygian mode, when you bring that half step in there, that's really changes the whole thing up. It really, really changes the whole characteristic sound. So big change just by adding that flat second in there. So the takeaway from all of this is, whatever key you're in, if you're in a minor sounding key, if you're in a minor key, playing against a minor chord, and you want more of like a jazz rock fusion type thing to go with, to solo with, you want to use the Phrygian mode and mix the Phrygian mode with a minor pentatonic and or a minor blues scale. And now I'll play a little bit to demonstrate mixing up the Phrygian mode with minor pentatonic and minor blues scales. I'll use the key of G to demonstrate. What is it about the Lydian mode that gives it its own unique sound? Every scale, every mode has a sequence or a pattern to it of steps. The Lydian mode has 5 whole steps and 2 half steps. A whole step is equivalent to 2 frets, a half step is equivalent to 1 fret. So if I apply that pattern, whole, 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 half, which makes up the Lydian mode, I'll demonstrate. I'll play a C Lydian mode on string 2. So string 2, fret 1, C note, and now I'm going to play a whole step higher, which is D, a whole step higher, which is E, a whole step higher, which is F sharp, a half step higher, which is G, a whole step higher, which is A, whole step higher, which is B, and a half step higher, which is C, brings us to the octave. Here's a C Lydian mode on string 2. And it has a certain characteristic sound to it because I'm following that sequence. Now, if I look at the notes I just played, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. There's the F sharp. What scale or what key has an F sharp in it? The answer is G. The key of G has 1 sharp, F sharp, and the G major scale has an F sharp. So a C Lydian mode shares the same notes as a G major scale. But here's the difference. You can hear this. Here's a G major scale. And it has the F sharp in there. And if I play a G chord, you can hear it against the chord, how it sounds like it matches. If I play the same G scale but start and end on a C note instead, so I'll play C to C but using the F sharp, it sounds closer to the C chord. Okay, so you could think of a C Lydian mode as a G major scale. They have the same notes. The difference being, though, if you want to think of it from the point of view as a G scale or G Ionian mode, you have to use the G as the key center. But if I want to use the C Lydian mode, which again is the same notes as a G scale, I just want to focus on the C note as my key center. So C Lydian and G major are the same. So one way you can think of a C Lydian mode, or any Lydian mode for that matter, is to think of playing a major scale built on the 5th of the key. If I'm in C, if C is my key center, the 5th of C is G. Okay? So the scale that's a 5th above the key center is the Lydian mode, but focusing on that root note C, not G. I hope that makes sense. And that's just another way to approach the mode, to think about it. You know, I'm in the key of C. What's the 5th of C? G. Oh, I'll play G scale, but focus on the C note, which is the 4th tone in the scale. If I'm in the key of F, play a C scale, because C is the 5th of F. If I'm in the key of E, play a B scale, because B is the 5th of E. But whatever key you're in, when you make that transition or that connection, you want to make sure you focus as your key center or root note, not the root note of the major scale you're going to apply it to, but the root note of the key that you're in. So again, if I'm in the key of E and I want to play E Lydian, I could play a B major scale, but not focus on the B note, focus on the E note. Right? That would be an E Lydian mode. A B scale, but using the E as the key center. Back to C for a moment here. One of the nice things you could see that, or comes out from this here, is when you play a C Lydian mode, the difference between that and the Ionian mode. Remember, the Ionian mode is a major sounding mode. C Ionian has all natural notes. It's a C major scale. And it sounds just like a C chord, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. If I make this Lydian, which means I'm raising the 4th tone, actually it's another way to look at a Lydian mode. It's a major scale with a sharp or raised 4th. C major scale. C Lydian Mode. I'm going to sharp that fourth tone. Instead of playing F, I'm going to play F sharp. So a Lydian Mode is a major scale with a sharp or raised fourth. Now by raising that fourth, it gives it kind of a, I like to think of almost like a haunting kind of a sound to it. Right? And it matches up with some interesting chords. Here's a C major 7 sharp 11 chord. Okay, here's a C major 7 chord. And if I play a C major scale, the C Ionian Mode, it's going to match that chord, sounds nice. But if I sharp that fourth, again changing the F to an F sharp, and what's the difference here? C major 7, but now I put an F sharp on the top. C major 7, and this would be the 11th, sharp 11th tone. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And if I sharp it, C major 7, sharp 11. So the Lydian Mode and the Ionian Mode, or the major scale, share 6 common notes or tones, but that fourth, by sharpening the fourth and creating a Lydian Mode, you get this whole different kind of character sound, kind of very haunting sounding. At least that's kind of how I like to think of it. Like all scales and modes, there are many patterns across the fingerboard, but this one I like to use. I use the phrase user-friendly, and the reason why this is a very good one, at least to start with, is because the lowest note is the root note of whatever key you want it to be. Okay, so using as an example, I'll play a C Lydian Mode across the strings here. I'm going to be in position 9, and now the ninth position means that you're going to cover 4 frets from 9 through 12, a finger to a fret, 9, 10, 11, 12. But this particular pattern on the string 6 and string 1, I'm going to stretch my first finger back to the left to get that 8th fret. So it opens up a space between my first and second finger just for these 2 strings. So again, this pattern, I'm still thinking I'm in position 9, but I'm going to be actually covering a 5 fret span because of those 2 strings that I'm stretching out on. So here's the pattern. Okay, again, C Lydian Mode in the 9th position, and my notes are C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, and continuing on. There again, that C major 7 sharp 11 chord. And needless to say, the nice thing about this is that you could see right away, string 6, finger 1, that's your key note. So wherever you want to play G Lydian, start on a G note. E Lydian, start on an E note, whatever. So it's pretty like straight ahead, and it's like right in front of you. Okay, and this the range of this scale or mode pattern is the root note is the lowest, and the highest note is the third degree of the scale. I have two octaves, and then a little bit extra on here, octave 1, octave 2, and octave 3. Right, so you get a pretty nice expanse across the fingerboard horizontally. Now, when using a mode for soloing, improvising, maybe composing lines, any application for it, you have to consider what type of mode it is. When I say type, I mean sort of chord category. I like to think of chords as 3 basic categories: major chords, or any type of major chord which has a major 3rd, major 7th if it's more advanced, things like that. Minor chords have a minor 3rd and a minor 7th, and then on if you're going to advanced chords. And the dominant chord, which has a major 3rd but a flat 7th, or a minor 7th if you will, which makes it the dominant type mode, which I'll get into the next video, which is on Mixolydian Mode. As I said, I think earlier in one of the videos, there are 4 minor modes, 2 major modes, and 1 dominant mode coming off of the major diatonic scale. The 2 major modes are the Ionian Mode, which is my first video, and the Lydian Mode, which is this one. Both major modes because they both have a natural third and a natural seventh. The difference between the Ionian Mode, again, is the Ionian Mode is all natural notes, and the all natural notes if you're in the key of C, and the Lydian Mode is a major scale or an Ionian Mode with a sharp fourth. But because it has the natural third and the natural seventh, it'll still apply to major sounding chords. And again, if I look at the first, what makes up a chord, the basic 3-part chord, the basic triad. Remember, a major triad is 1-3-5, a minor is 1 flat 3-5. So if I play the first, third, and fifth note of the Ionian Mode, I have C, E, G. And what does that give me? A C major chord. So right there, you know that it's a major sounding mode. If I played C, E flat, G, that would give me a C minor chord. So again, the Lydian Mode is a major mode because it has a natural third. Now, the Lydian Mode has a, as I said earlier, kind of a haunting kind of a sound to it. At least that's a way I like to think of it. And you can use it in a light or jazzier type of setting, but you can also use that same idea or that same concept in a more of a rock type setting. Here I'll just play a line kind of demonstrating like a softer, jazzier kind of sound using the Lydian Mode in a softer, jazzier type setting. As I just demonstrated, using the Lydian Mode to create a softer, warmer, jazzier type of a line, it's not without saying that the Lydian Mode can also be used in a rock type of a setting. A perfect example of this is the song Whipping Post from the Allman Brothers Band. When they used to play this live, the original band with Dwayne Allman, towards the end of the song, the band would just kind of pedal a C chord, free time. They would just sort of kind of staying on that, and while they were doing that, Dwayne Allman would be playing over that using Lydian Mode. If he just played a C Ionian Mode or C major scale, being that it's a C major chord, it would sound a little too much like Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. But because he used the Lydian Mode with the raised fourth, it gives it, again, I like to use that term, haunting, kind of a very haunting type of a sound. So here's an idea of what Dwayne Allman played over that section of Whipping Post when the band would just pedal the C chord. So there you can see the Lydian Mode being put to use in more of a rock type of a setting. As I mentioned earlier, you can always mix modes up with the correct pentatonic and or blues scales. Remember, there are only 2 types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and only 2 types of blues scales, major and minor. And being that the Lydian Mode, as I showed you earlier, is a major sounding mode, that means you can mix up the Lydian Mode with the major pentatonic and or the major blues scales. Here's a C major pentatonic scale. Remember, a pentatonic scale is a 5-tone scale. C major pentatonic. Here's a C major blues scale. Remember, Remember, the blues scale is a pentatonic scale, or the major blues scale is a major pentatonic scale with the addition of a flat third, which acts as a passing tone to the major third. Here's in the pentatonic scale, you're using the root, second, third, fifth, and sixth degree, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 of the major scale, and the major blues scale, 1, 2, flat 3, 3, 5, 6. So it gives you that passing tone from the flat third to the third. And again, back to the Lydian mode, C Lydian. A lot of common tones between those three modes. Now, as I said, with the major blues scale, you have the flat third to the natural third acting as a passing tone. If you play the pentatonic, a C major pentatonic scale, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. But before the 5, if I insert that sharp fourth, which is in the Lydian mode, that can act as a transition or a leading tone into the natural fifth. So I could have two leading tones, if you will, by mixing the Lydian with the major blues scale. Okay, C, D, E flat, G, F sharp, G. So what I did there was I mixed up the notes between a C Lydian mode and a C major blues scale, which gave me two half-step passing tones. Again, the flat third to the natural third, and the sharp fourth to the natural fifth. Again, it comes down to your ears. You know, if you like the way it sounds, cool, use it. You know, experiment, move around, try different things. Again, like any other scales, you want to get these scale patterns in your hands, in muscle memory, so you don't have to think about it when you're playing, and let your ears work things out and see what works and what doesn't. Now I'll play a little bit, mixing up the Lydian mode with the major pentatonic scale and the major blues scale. I'll use the key of C to demonstrate. What makes the Mixolydian mode sound the way it does? Every scale, every mode has a pattern or formula to it of steps, and by following that pattern you'll create the mode or the scale. The pattern for a Mixolydian mode is whole, whole, half, half, whole. A whole step is equivalent to 2 frets, a half step is equivalent to 1 fret. So I'll play a Mixolydian mode. I'll use C as an example. I'll play a C Mixolydian mode on string 2, and I'm going to play it horizontally just on 1 string. So this way you can really clearly see that pattern laying out of a whole step or 2 frets and a half step or 1 fret as I move up. Okay, C Mixolydian mode on string 2. C note, and now whole step higher, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, and whole step to complete. So here's the, again, C Mixolydian mode on string 2. Okay? Now, if I look at the notes I just played, C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. I see that the C Mixolydian mode has 6 natural notes and 1, excuse me, and 1 flat. It has a B flat. What key or scale has a B flat note? The answer is F, an F major scale, or the key of F. Okay? So a C Mixolydian mode shares the same notes as an F major scale. So you could think of it, if you want to play a Mixolydian mode, you can play a major scale built on the fourth of the key that you're in. In other words, I'm in the key of C, let's say, and I want to play C Mixolydian mode. I could just play an F scale, but I want to focus on the C note, not the F note, because C is my key, and I want that to be what really, has the, I want that to be the key center, as my ears want to hear that as the center tone or the central tone, as the other notes revolve around that. So again, here's an F scale across these 6 strings. And it sounds like an F chord. Now if I play the same pattern, but starting and ending on a C note, it's going to sound like this. And it sounds like a 7th chord, or a dominant sounding chord, 7th, 9th. And that's where you can clearly see the Mixolydian mode is perfect for playing blues type chords, 7ths, 9ths, and chords in that family. Now as a comparison of the C Mixolydian mode to the C Ionian mode, or the C major scale, as I showed you a while ago, that the C Mixolydian mode has all natural notes but 1 flat. The C Ionian mode, or C major scale, has all natural notes. Here's a C Ionian mode, or C major scale. And it sounds like a C chord. Perfect, fits. If I just change that B note to a flat, and I place the Mixolydian mode now, right? It turns it into a 7th sounding chord, a dominant sounding chord. So it's that critical note, the B to a B flat, in the key of C, that really creates that Mixolydian sound. So another way to look at the Mixolydian mode is a major scale with a flat 7th. Again, here's a C major scale. And the 7th tone you can see is B. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And if I flat the B, instead of playing B, I play B flat. And right there's the giveaway that it sounds exactly like a 7th chord or a 9th. Again, good for dominant family chords. As I mentioned in previous videos, there are 3 categories of chords. There are major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. The major type chords have a major 3rd and or a major 7th, or a natural 3rd and a natural 7th. The minor type chords have a flatted 3rd and or a flatted 7th. The dominant family of chords have a major 3rd or a natural 3rd but a flat 7th. So it's kind of in between the two of them, if you will. And again, as I mentioned in other videos, there are, being that there are 7 modes on the major diatonic scale, 2 of the modes are major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian, because they have a natural 3rd and a natural 7th. 4 modes are minor sounding modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian, because they have flatted 3rds and flatted 7ths. So the one mode that has the one mode that belongs to the dominant family is this Mixolydian mode, because again it has a natural 3rd but a flatted 7th, and it's that flat 7th that really changes everything. That's what gives it that bluesy sound. Okay, so Mixolydian mode is your go-to scale in a lot of ways for playing blues, blues rock, and all kinds of things like that. And I'll show you later in this video how to use it and connect it with pentatonic scales and have a nice musical sandbox. I like to use that phrase, a nice musical sandbox to play in. There are many patterns for playing scales and modes across the fingerboard, but this one here I think is not only a user-friendly one, but I'll show you how this can work with connecting to pentatonic and blues scales later on in this video. Okay, I'm in position 5, and that means I'm covering frets 5 through 8. Here's a C Mixolydian mode. The pattern is Mixolydian, and the root note, I'm going to start with my 4th finger on string 6. There's my C note. So here's C Mixolydian mode, position 5. And you can hear it sounds like a seventh chord. I said earlier that a C Mixolydian mode and an F major scale have the same notes. So if I start on an F note, which is here, and play the same exact notes, but just starting and ending on the F note, it sounds like this. Sounds like Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do in the key of F. So you can clearly hear that depending on which note you choose as the key center will really change everything up. Again, F scale or Mixolydian mode starting on F sounds like an F scale, sounds like an F chord, I mean. Same notes starting on C. Okay, so you can clearly hear the difference. So the Mixolydian mode definitely gives you that bluesier sound, and as I said earlier, you can think of it as a major scale built 1/4 above it, but focus on the, if I'm in the key of C, play an F scale, but focus on the C note, not the F note as your key center. Earlier I mentioned that a Mixolydian mode is a dominant sounding mode, works with the dominant type chords. There are 3 chord categories: major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. Your major chords are like major, major 7, major 9, you know, anything like that. Minor type chords, minor, minor 7th, minor 11th, da da da. And the dominant chords are the 7th, 9th, 11th, like the bluesier sounding chords. What makes up a major chord? Your basic triad. Here's a C scale. Okay, what makes up the basic major triad is the 1, 3, 5. You take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the scale, and you will have a major chord. So if I play the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of C, I have C, E, G, and it sounds like C major chord. A minor chord is 1 flat 3, 5. You flat the 3rd to make a major chord into a minor chord. Okay, and you can hear clearly the difference. So the major and the minor chords have just 3 principal notes to make them happen: 1, 3, and 5. The next note that would come in, because chords are built in a series of thirds, the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, the even number 6 is used for a 6th chord, and a 4, 2 and a 4 would be used for suspended chords. But primarily chords are built on thirds using the odd numbers: 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Anyway, getting into the weeds here a little bit. To make a major chord, again, 1, 3, 5. Minor, 1 flat 3, 5. Now, when you want to get into the dominant chord family, you need to bring in the next number, which is 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. But that also works with advanced major chords. In other words, if I played the first 1, 3, 5 for a major chord, I have C major. If I add the 7th tone of that scale, which is B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so I'd have, that would give me a major 7th chord, C, E, G, B. Okay? Now, as I mentioned before, that the C Mixolydian mode has a B flat, so if I play this, C, E, G, instead of B, like I just showed you, if I played C, E, G, B flat, you could hear that. So a C 7th chord is a dominant chord which needs at least the first 4 notes to make it happen. C, E, G, B flat, which is number 7. If I go to 9, it's the D note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now I have a 9th chord. Okay? But as you can see, the B flat note, the flatted 7th, is what really gives it its characteristic sound. Again, here's a C major scale, a C Ionian mode. And if I flat the 7th, just by changing that one note, flatting that 7th degree by a half step, pushes me from the major category into the dominant category. Let's talk about mixing the Mixolydian mode with pentatonic and blues scales. The interesting thing about the Mixolydian mode is that you can mix it up with both major and minor pentatonic scales and both major and minor blues scales, where with the other 6 modes they're limited to either major or minor type pentatonic and blues scales. In other words, there are 4 minor modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian, and they will mix with only minor pentatonic and minor blues scales because they have a flat third and a flat seventh, and they belong to the minor chord family. And the 2 major modes, Ionian and Lydian, have a natural third and a natural seventh, so they will mix with major pentatonic and major blues scales because they belong to the major chord family. And the interesting thing about the Mixolydian mode is because it has a natural third which sort of leans it into the major chord family, but a flat seventh which kind of leans it into the minor chord family, it actually sits well with both in a blues type situation. It won't work, Mixolydian mode will not work with minor chords because it has a natural third, but the flat seventh gives it that edge, if you will, a little, not really minor sounding, but a little bit, more bluesier sounding, if you will, not as pretty, because again, the Ionian mode is very pretty, that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but when you flat the seventh, it sort of gives it that little edge, and it shaves off some of that prettiness, if you will, and gives a little bit more of a darker, edgier feel to it. As I showed you earlier, a common pattern for the Mixolydian mode, and I'll use the key of C as an example, is this. I'm in position 5, my pinky is on the 6th string, the C note, so that means I'm covering frets 5 through 8. Here's a C Mixolydian mode in position 5. Now, here's a C major pentatonic scale. Same position, same starting and ending note, that low C note on string 6. And here's a C major blues scale. Same position, same starting note. And now I'm going to replace my pinky with my first finger, putting me in position 8, and I'm now going to play a C minor pentatonic scale. And now a C minor blues scale. So 5 patterns in a similar area. With my pinky on the root note on string 6, I can play a Mixolydian mode, a major pentatonic, and a major blues. And if I put my first finger on that same note, I can play a minor pentatonic and a minor blues. And as I said, both of those pentatonic scales and both of those blues scales can mix in well with the Mixolydian mode and give you access to a lot of possibilities. The difference is pretty straight ahead. You can hear it when you play the major pentatonic or major blues versus the minor pentatonic and the minor blues. Check out my video on pentatonic and blues scales for a deeper dive into those 2 types of scales, major and minor pentatonic and major and minor blues. Now, the Mixolydian mode, although it's a dominant mode and it's good for blues type chords, sevenths, ninths, things like that, it's not so widely used in straight up blues music or used by the great blues guitar players, Clapton, Johnny Winter, Stevie Ray, Jimi Hendrix, too many to name, so I'm sure you all have your favorites. But that being said, when you're playing straight up blues, you're pretty much just relying on the major, minor pentatonic, and major, minor blues scales, where the Mixolydian mode tends to sit better in a blues rock, jazz rock type setting. Let's say guitar players like Larry Carlton, Robin Ford would tend to use more of the mode type scales, or use modes and things like that, which sort of takes it into the little bit more of a fusion type of a setting, as opposed to straight up blues type licks that we usually hear in blues music. One other thing I should mention is there is some blues music where you cannot use both pentatonics and both type of blues, and that's if a blues tune is in a specific minor key. For example, The Thrill Is Gone by B.B. King, being that that song is in a minor key, I think it's in the key of B minor. So that being said, you are limited to just minor pentatonic and minor blues in that playing in that song or in that situation. Here's another interesting thing about the Mixolydian mode regarding harmonica, or harp as we like to call it. If you're playing a blues tune and somebody pulls a harp out and wants to play along, they need to use a harp that's built on the fourth of the key that you're in. Okay? Because the Mixolydian, remember I said the Mixolydian mode is the same as playing a major scale built on the fourth of your key. Unless someone's using a chromatic harp, most harps are just like major scales. So a C harp would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, all natural notes. Okay? That goes for all the keys. If you were playing blues in E, let's say Roadhouse Blues by the Doors, okay, and you want to play a harp to that, I'm in the key of E. If you played an E harp, it would clash, because if you played an E harmonica, which would have an E major scale, basically, you'd have that natural seventh, D sharp, and against the D chord, against the E seventh chord, it would sound pretty weird playing Roadhouse Blues. Ouch, right? So the Mixolydian mode to E is the same as an A scale, and it would take that D sharp and bring it back to a D natural, and then you would have something that sounds right. Regarding, again, with harmonicas or harps, whatever key you're in a blues situation, the harp should be built on the fourth of the key. If you're playing blues in E, use an A harp. If you're playing blues in G, use a C harp. If you're playing blues in F, use a B flat harp. Okay? Because that will give you the sound of the Mixolydian mode. And if you don't, if you use the same key, you'll be having some people giving you the evil eye, or maybe taking their shoe off and throwing it at you. So don't forget, harmonica, the fourth above the key. Now I'll play a little bit using the Mixolydian mode mixed with both major and minor pentatonic scales and major and minor blues scales. I'll use the key of C to demonstrate. What gives the Aeolian mode its own unique sound? Every scale, every mode has a formula, a chemistry, or a sequence of steps that gives it its own unique characteristic sound. The sequence, or the formula for an Aeolian mode, is whole, half, whole, half, whole, whole. Alright, what does that mean? After hitting the first note, or the root note, the next note will be a whole step higher, then a half step higher, then whole step, half step, and following that sequence. Remember, a whole step is equivalent to 2 frets, and a half step is equivalent to 1 fret. I'll demonstrate an Aeolian mode on the second string, the B string, and just play it on that one string so you can see horizontally that series of steps works. In other words, the 1 fret, 2 fret thing I was just talking about. Okay, here's an Aeolian mode on the second string, B Aeolian mode. So I'm going to start with the second string open, and then I'll go a whole step higher, a half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. And we put that together, it's this. That's a B Aeolian mode. Okay, Now if you look at this mode, or actually if you look at the notes I just played, I have B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. Okay? I have two sharps in here, C sharp and F sharp. What key has those two sharps in it? Well, what scale? The key with two sharps is the key of D major, or a D major scale. So a B Aeolian mode has the same notes as a D major scale. And remember, the major scale is also, you can call it the Ionian mode. It's the first of the 7 modes. So that's the interesting connection there. B Aeolian is the same as D major or D Ionian. Now, as I just mentioned, the B Aeolian mode is the same as a D major scale or a D Ionian mode. There's a phrase called relative major minor, if you're not aware of that term. Every key, in a sense, has two keys associated with it, the major key or the relative minor key. Kind of like two sides to the same coin. If I use C for an example, the key of C major has no sharps or flats, you know, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Here's a C scale, C major scale. C to C, no sharps, no flats. The A minor scale, or the A Aeolian mode, has the same note setup, no sharps, no flats. Here's an A Aeolian mode. So C major, or C Ionian mode, and A Aeolian, or A natural minor, has the same notes. Again, like two sides of the same coin. So that's a concept, again, I said, it's called relative major minor. In other words, G major is the same as E minor, C major is the same as A minor. So if you're looking at it from the perspective of the major root note, if I think of C major, the relative minor to C major is A minor. C major, A minor, G major, E minor. Two sides of the same coin. So for an example, if you look at a piece of music, if you read music, and you see a key signature. Let's say I look at a piece of music and I see one sharp, and I haven't played the piece, I don't know what it's going to sound like. I wouldn't know by seeing the one sharp if it's in the key of G or the key of E minor. I would have to play through the piece somewhat to see what key it's in, because one sharp would mean the key of G major or the key of E minor. If it had no sharps, it could be the key of C major or the key of A minor. So of the 7 modes, those two, the Ionian and the Aeolian, kind of have a unique thing going on there as opposed to the other 5 modes. Okay, and you'll see this later when I show some pentatonic scales, how this kind of fits into play here. So again, relative major minor means two sides of the same coin. Every key, in a sense, could be looked at two different keys, the major key or the relative minor key. There are plenty of positions for playing the Aeolian mode, as for like any other scales and modes. But here is a very user-friendly one, sort of almost like a go-to, if you will, pattern for the Aeolian mode. And the nice thing about this is later in the video, when I show you about connecting the Aeolian mode with the pentatonic and the blues scales, how it sits right in the same area. Okay, I'll use B as an example, the key of B. So here's a B Aeolian mode. I'm going to be in position 7. Okay, now one thing about this particular pattern, in position 7, I'm covering frets 7 through 10, but there's one note that is going to be outside that position, and I have two choices to play it, and I'll show you as I get through. The first way I'm going to play this, I'm going to have to, as I said, I'm in position 7, I'm going to have to stretch my pinky out 1 fret to the right for string 4. So here's this pattern, position 7, B Aeolian mode. So when I went to string 4, I had fingers 1, 3. I can't use my pinky right there. I would have to pull it up 1 fret to get that C sharp in this key. So again, here's B Aeolian mode, stretching my pinky out on string 4. Now there is another option. If I don't want to stretch my pinky out on string 4, I can get that same note, that C sharp, by getting it on string 3 and pulling my first finger back to the left 1 fret. So in this case, here's a bit of a different fingering. Now instead of this, stretching the pinky out, I'll get that note on string 3 and then Okay, so here in that case I stretched my first finger on string 3 back 1 fret and then pulled it right back. Now I'm in position 7, as I said. If you do this, you got to be careful when you pull your first finger back to fret 6. You don't want to stay here, because then if you continue on that way, you may lose yourself in the fingering and hit some notes you don't want to hear. So I like to use the term stretch. In other words, don't move your left hand to the left. Just stretch your first finger a bit to the left and then pull it right back. So these fingers and your thumb kind of lock yourself into place here. And the reason for this is when you want to use these scales, kind of get them into your head and hands like muscle memory, especially if you're doing some like really fast shredding type stuff. You don't want to take a chance and maybe be in the wrong position. So at least that's the way I kind of like to look at this. Keep yourself in the right position, stay there, and if you're using the first way I showed you, stretch your pinky out to the right 1 fret, or stretch your first finger to the left 1 fret on string 3. So it's something to keep in mind. Okay, as I said before, the two sides of the same coin thing. B Aeolian is the same as D Ionian. The first mode and the sixth mode are the same, just two sides of the same coin. Here's this pattern again, B Aeolian Mode. I'm going to start on the B note, which is my lowest tone. I'll play to the highest note in that pattern and back to the B note. And there's a B minor chord, and it sounds like it locks in with that chord. Now I'll just start in the D note, which is the 6th string, with my pinky. And I'll start there, go to the highest note, to the lowest note, and back to where I started from to encompass or to use up all the notes in this pattern. Listen to this. And there's a D chord, and it sounds like it matches that. So you can clearly hear that although the notes are identical in both scales, the B Aeolian mode and the D Ionian mode, or the B natural minor scale and the D major scale, the difference is using the right key center. Okay, and again, that term relative major minor really shows you very clearly the connection with those two different scales or those two different modes. Now, using the Aeolian mode, you have to consider where to use it correctly in the right situation, the right key, or against the right type chord or chords. The Aeolian mode is a minor sounding mode. And the reason it's a minor sounding mode, meaning it'll work for minor keys or minor type chords, chords in the minor family. And why is that? If you take the basic elements of a chord, major chord is 1, 3, 5, the first, third, and fifth note of a scale. So if here's a B major triad. It sounds major. Okay? Any major chord is built on the first, third, and fifth degree of the major scale. To make a chord minor, you flat the third. So it'll be 1, flat 3, and 5. And it sounds minor. So if I look at the Aeolian mode and take the first, third, and fifth note of the scale, there's root note, the first note of the root, third, fifth. And it sounds clearly like a minor chord. Okay? So B Aeolian or any Aeolian mode will work for a minor key or minor type chords. Now, that being said, there are 4 minor modes that derived from the major diatonic scale. There's the Dorian Mode, the Phrygian Mode, the Aeolian Mode that we're talking about here, and also the Locrian Mode, which I'll get to in my next video. The point is, since there are 4 minor type modes, and they'll all work in minor type, minor keys, minor type chords, which is the correct one or the type of music. And the Aeolian Mode is probably best suited for rock and metal type music. Not so much for blues, not so much for maybe shredding, although you could use it for shredding type stuff. But the Aeolian Mode is really a great choice for rock and straight up metal type music. Bands like Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Metallica, things like that. As I mentioned, with any mode, you can mix them up with the pentatonic and the blues scales to get more out of your playing. And in this case, since we're dealing with the Aeolian mode, and I mentioned before that the Aeolian mode is a minor sounding mode because it has a flat third in there, it will mix well with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues scales. I'll use the key of B again to demonstrate this. Here again is the B Aeolian mode I showed you earlier. Okay, here's a B minor pentatonic scale. Some people call it the rock scale. You know, it's your basic go-to scale. You know, I'm sure everybody knows this one. Right? Again, your basic rock blues type scale. Here's the minor blues scale. It's the minor pentatonic, again, which is a 5-tone scale, and this is a 6-tone scale. It adds that passing tone, the sharp 4, the flat 5 to the 5, acts as that, again, as that passing tone, turning a minor pentatonic into a minor blues scale. Okay, now if I look at these three scales together, you'll see a lot of common notes. Actually, all the notes in the minor pentatonic scale are in the Aeolian mode, and 5 of the 6 notes in the blues scale, the minor blues scale, are in there. The blues scale, again, the note that's different is that sharp 4, flat 5, which is your tritone there, or sometimes people call it the blues note. Now, the reason I mention this is because since all 3 of these will work in the context of, like, you know, rock music, as I mentioned, you know, bands like Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, you know, Metallica, things like that. The difference between the minor pentatonic and the Aeolian mode, there's those 2 notes in the Aeolian mode that are not in the minor pentatonic. The second tone, which is the C sharp, and the 6th tone, the 2nd and the 6th degrees. So those 2 notes or degrees of the scale, this and this, which are not in the minor pentatonic, are what gives the Aeolian mode its true characteristic sound. If you left those 2 notes out, you'd have a minor pentatonic scale. Okay, so the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scale are more straight ahead up for like blues music, rock music, of course. But when you incorporate those 2 notes, again, the 2nd and the 6th, that's what gives, again, that characteristic sound and really highlights the Aeolian mode. And again, it really shines when you're using it in a rock metal type of context. It does not work so well for blues if you're playing the... You go... You know, pentatonic stuff is going to work, but if you went... Ouch, you know, it doesn't really fit in the blues situation. So it's something to keep in mind. The Aeolian mode, great for minor keys, great for minor chords, not so great for blues. As I said earlier, the modes are usually used for soloing, improvising, you know, things like that. But you can also use them in composing situations. You can create lines, you know, for signature lines for songs. In the metal genre, which this mode sits well in, just as an example, the Black Sabbath, I think it's the end of the song, or the second part of the song Black Sabbath, from their first album, I believe, the Black Sabbath album. They play a line which is built off of the Aeolian mode. I think the song is in F sharp, or it might be, they might have played it in G and tuned down a half step, but you know, a concert sounding is F sharp. Anyway, so here's an F sharp Aeolian mode, or a natural minor scale. And the line to that song is... Okay, there's your root note, your keynote F sharp. And again, as I said here, that 6th tone, which does not work well in like straight ahead blues music, but that 6th tone really gives it the characteristic sound. When you hear that, you know, yeah, it screams Aeolian mode or natural minor scale. So just some cool things to consider. You can create lines, signature lines, from the modes. They're not just used for soloing and improvising. Here's an interesting thing you can use the Aeolian Mode for. Take a band like Iron Maiden, where you have two lead guitar players. Sometimes they play signature lines or recognizable lines, but they're played in harmony. Very, very simple to harmonize a line using the Aeolian Mode. Let's say I go to the B Aeolian Mode, which I was showing you before. Here's the root note again in the center root note, I should say, of the scale, because this particular scale has 3 root notes. The lowest note, string 6, the center one here, and, okay, so a little flat there. Okay, there you go, there's that B note. Okay, let's say I just take part of the scale and I play a little line that goes like this. Okay, if I want to harmonize to that line, I have choices. I could do 1-3 harmony or 1-5 harmony. Okay, in other words, the root note here, 1, we're calling that, 1, or the key note there. If I go 2 notes higher in the scale, 1, 2, 3, which is D, the E minor third, whatever I do starting from here, I'll just start on this note and follow suit in the scale in the same pattern. In other words, here I'm playing a sequence of 5 notes and returning 1, 2, 3. Now I'll just start 2 notes above, which is here, and I'll follow the same sequence, going up to 5 notes and then returning. Okay, and if I put those 2 together, it's going to sound like this. So 2 guitar players can harmonize with each other. One goes, the other, and when you put it together, you have what I just played. And that pattern, or that concept, applies to anything in the scale. It doesn't have to be, just playing scalar in terms of like playing every single note in, following the scale in steps. I could do whatever I want, just anything, and whatever I did, guitar 2 would just play 2 notes higher in that scale pattern to complement me, and doing that you would have what's called 1-3 harmony. You can also have 1-5 harmony from the natural minor scale or Aeolian Mode. Let's say take that same line again I just played, starting on the root note. Let's say this is guitar 1. I'll just go to the 5th of that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'll just start here on the F sharp and play that same pattern, same zigzagging pattern, if you will, but making sure I stay within the notes in that pattern for the Aeolian Mode. So guitar 1, guitar 2, and if I put those together, it sounds like this. So you can have guitar 1 play from the root note and guitar 2 playing from the 5th, giving you 1-5 harmony, or guitar 1 playing from the root and guitar 2 playing from the 3rd, giving you 1-3 harmony. Now it doesn't matter where you start. Guitar 1, let's say, can start anywhere, but the second guitar playing the harmony above that just has to be 2 notes higher for 1-3 harmony, or 4 notes higher for 1-5 harmony. You can also have 3-5 harmony, which is in a sense the same thing, just like kind of, superimposed a little bit higher in the scale. Or if you had 3 guitar players in the band, who has 3 guitar, let's say Leonard Skinner, although I don't think that they do things like this, but let's say if you had a metal band or something with 3 guitar players, 1 guitar player could go, second guitar could go, third guitar could go, and you could have 3-part harmony on a line. And that's all because, again, the basic minor chord, the B minor chord, is 1, flat 3, 5. And when you put those together, you're harmonizing the chord. Now, as you can see, it's very, very easy to create a harmony line using the Aeolian Mode or natural minor scale in a rock setting, with 2 guitar player bands like Iron Maiden. The same concept applies with the Ionian Mode or the major scale. If you check out my first video in this series on the Ionian Mode, I'll show you examples of applying this concept of 1-3 and 1-5 harmony using the Ionian Mode or the major scale. And a band that made good use of this is the Allman Brothers Band. That was a big part of their sound, their signature sound, if you will, of creating these really pretty harmonizing lines based off of the major scale or the Ionian Mode. Now I'll play a little bit, mixing up the Aeolian Mode with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scales. I'll use the key of B as an example. What gives the Locrian Mode its own unique sound, differentiating it from other modes and scales? Every mode, every scale has a sequence to it, a chemistry, if you will, a pattern of steps, half and whole steps. The Locrian Mode, like the other 6 modes, contains 5 whole steps and 2 half steps. A whole step is equivalent to 2 frets on the guitar, a half step is equivalent to 1 fret. And the sequence, or the pattern for a Locrian Mode, is half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. And what do I mean by that? I'll demonstrate a Locrian Mode on 1 string, and I'll play it horizontally as opposed to vertically across the strings. I'll just play the mode on 1 string so you can see as I go to my right horizontally that I'm going to be, making use of either 1 or 2 frets from one note to the next. Okay, here's an E Locrian Mode, the open E string. Okay, I'll show you how this works. Open E, there's my root note. Then the next note is going to be a half step higher, F, a whole step higher, G, a whole step higher, then a half step, then a whole step, then a whole step, then a whole step. So after I hit my first note, the next note is a half step or 1 fret higher, then 2 whole steps, then another half step, and then 3 whole steps. And here's an E Locrian Mode, string 6. And one more time. Okay, any note I start on anywhere, if I follow that sequence of half, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 I will have a Locrian Mode. Again, that's what gives it its unique sound and why it sounds different than the other modes or other scales. If I look at what I just played, the notes that I just played, there's something interesting to see here. I played all natural notes except I have a B flat. I have E, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E. So 6 natural notes and 1 flat. What scale or key has a B flat? The answer is F, the key of F, or a F major scale. Here's an F major scale. Okay, it has all natural notes but B flat. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. Okay, so what's unique about the Locrian Mode is that it contains the same notes as an F major scale. And remember, F is 1 fret higher than E, or half step above E. So what's interesting is you could think of an E Locrian Mode as an F major scale, and that would mean just playing a major scale 1 half step above the key that I'm in. Here's an E note. If I just play an F scale, sounds like an F chord. But if I start on the E note using E as my key center and returning to E, it sounds quite different. Again, the same exact notes as in the F scale, 6 natural notes and a B flat, but using E as my key center. Okay, F scale, E Locrian Mode. Sounds completely different. So the reason for that is because if I use F as my key center, the sequence is after I hit my first note, I'm going a whole step higher, and a half step higher, and following that. And remember, the major scale is the same as the Ionian Mode. Check out my first video in this series on the Ionian Mode. So that's really what differentiates these, why they all sound different. It's because after hitting the key note or the root note, what is the sequence that I'm playing as I go forward till I reach the octave when I hit that note again. And all the modes have 5 whole steps and 2 half steps, but it's the combination or the pattern that changes, and that is what gives each mode its characteristic or its unique sound. There are many patterns for the Locrian Mode, like any mode or scale, and this one I think is kind of user-friendly because it just sits really nicely in your hands, and the lowest note on the 6th string with your first finger is the key note, so that way you can easily see how to access that for any particular key. I'll use the key of E as an example. So I'm going to play an E Locrian Mode in the 12th position. So my first finger is going to be on string 6, fret 12. Here's my E note, and here's E Locrian Mode in position 12. And you can hear that characteristic sound, that sort of dark-ish type of a sound that the Locrian Mode gives off. Now, as I said before, the E Locrian Mode is the same as an F major scale or an F Ionian Mode. The second note in the Locrian Mode is the F note. So if I start and stop on the F note, and I'll play an F major scale, again I'm going to play the same exact pattern I just played, but instead of starting and ending here, I'm going to start and end here. It sounds like this. And there's your F chord, and it sounds like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So it's quite interesting how just by starting on the E note as opposed to the F note really colors the whole thing up. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, with all scales, modes, the sequence pattern changes. If I start on the F note, which gives it the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la sound, it's because the pattern or the sequence is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, starting here. But if I start here, it's half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. And that's really what makes one scale or mode sound different than another. It's the sequence of steps, whole steps, half steps, that really change up the characteristic sound. And with that, that puts it into a different type of category for what kind of chords to use it with. Again, as I said in these other mode videos that I had done, there are 2 major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian, and there are 4 minor sounding modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian, this one here. And there's 1 dominant sounding mode. And again, there are 3 types of chord categories. There's major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. You know, the 7th and the 9th chords, your bluesy sounding chords. So using the correct mode against the correct chord type or the correct key is really what's important here. The Locrian Mode is considered a minor mode, and that's because it has a flat third. If I take an E major scale, remember all chords are built on the major scales, or that's how, you know, the chemistry of chords come from the scale, the major scale. Here's an E major scale. And if I want to make a major chord, I would take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of that, and it sounds like an E major chord. To make a chord into a minor chord, you flat the 3rd. Or, right? Now, if I go back to that pattern I showed you earlier for the Locrian Mode in the 12th position, if I take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th degrees of this scale, I have E, G, which is the flat third of E, but now I have a flat 5, not a natural 5. Again, here's an E minor triad in position 12. Here's an E diminished triad, because the diminished triad is 1, flat 3, flat 5. So the point is, the Locrian Mode actually has a flat 5th, not a natural 5th, which actually creates a diminished triad. But because it has a minor third, it's still going to be useful or applicable to chords in the minor chord category. But the nice thing about this, or the interesting thing about this, is because of that flat fifth, later in the video when I show you how to link up the Locrian mode with the correct minor pentatonic and minor blues scales, that B flat note, that flat 5, will definitely have an important role in comparing these the Locrian mode to the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scale. Being that the Locrian mode is a minor sounding mode because it has a flat third in it, it will join up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues scales. Okay? Remember, there are only two types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and two types of blues scales, major and minor. So you obviously would link the modes up with the correct either major or minor pentatonic or major and minor blues scales. Check out my video on pentatonic and blues scales for a deep dive into those scales with lots of options for fingering patterns and vertical and horizontal playing and just a whole bunch of stuff about those two types of scales. Okay, back to the Locrian mode. As I said, the Locrian mode will link up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues scale. Here's the E Locrian mode in position 12 as I showed you earlier. Okay, here's the E minor pentatonic scale in position 12. And here's the E minor blues scale in position 12. Remember, the pentatonic scale is a 5-tone scale. The blues scale is a 6-tone scale. It's the the minor pentatonic with the it has that passing tone from the 4th to the 5th degree, and that is what gives it that characteristic sound. But now, by comparing these three, if you overlap the Locrian with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scale, you can see that that B flat note in the minor blues scale, the flat 5, is also in the Locrian. Okay? Minor blues, Locrian. The pentatonic has the natural 5th, which is not in the Locrian mode. But if you're in a playing situation like a shredding, kind of thing, where you're playing a million notes a second, it's not going to really matter that much, and it's not going to hurt having a flat 5th or a 5th or a natural 5th in there, unless it's specific that you're playing over some type of a diminished chord or something, and that natural 5th might clash. But usually in shredding, type stuff, just as long as you're in the scale pattern, pretty much you're good to go. So what's the takeaway here? When you're using a Locrian mode, you can mix it up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues scales, and you'll have some nice options. And again, of course, like with all the modes mixing up with the pentatonic and the blues scales, the difference being it's those characteristic notes that are not in the pentatonic, for example, or the blues scale, that differentiates or gives the mode a particular characteristic sound. Again, with the Locrian mode, there are two notes in here that are not in the blues or the pentatonic scale. It's the F and it's the C. Okay? So those two notes, if I didn't play those, I would have the pentatonic minor and or the minor blues scale. It's these notes you could hear right away. That's what gives it that sound, the Locrian. It's like screaming, "Hey, I'm a Locrian mode." Right? Because if I don't play those notes, now it sounds like your straight ahead rock pentatonic scale. So by including those two notes, again, the pentatonic scale is a 5-tone scale. All the pentatonic notes are, basically in the modes, but the modes having 7 tones, it's the 2 extra tones that are not in the pentatonic scale, which really is what gives the characteristic sound to that particular mode. And that applies to all these 7 modes. If you watch all the other videos on the other modes that I did, I'll make that same comparison on all the 7 modes. It's those 2 notes that the modes have that the pentatonic doesn't have. So when you mix them up with pentatonics, again, like I said, if you're playing straight pentatonic, you'll have your basic rock blues scales that will work for most situations. When you add those 2 extra notes in, now you've flavored this up into a particular mode. I like to use a lot of analogies, and sometimes with students that I work with, again, using analogies, I think of, let's say, a seasoning or salad dressing. You know, if you made a salad and you got a choice, you have Italian dressing, French dressing, ranch, Thousand Island, whatever. Each mode kind of has a characteristic flavor to it, and it's like, what do you want to use? What salad? What do I want on my salad? Tonight, French or ranch or whatever. What mode do I want to use? Because again, there are, as I mentioned earlier in the other videos, being that there are 7 modes, there are 2 major sounding modes, 4 minor sounding modes, and 1 dominant sounding mode. The dominant sounding mode is the Mixolydian, which lends itself to 7th and 9th type chords. Now, as I mentioned, there are 4 minor sounding modes: the Dorian, the Phrygian, the Aeolian, which is the natural minor scale, and the Locrian mode. So if you're playing in a minor key or against minor chords, you might say, well, gee, there's 4 minor modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. Which one should I use? That's when it comes down to some specific details about the modes. The Dorian mode is more suited for rock, jazz rock, and will give you a sound characteristic of guitar players like Carlos Santana, of course in a minor key. Like some of the songs, Evil Ways, Oye Como Va, those things like that. You want to play guitar solos that sound like that, use the Dorian mode mixed up with the minor pentatonic and minor blues scales. The Phrygian mode is more of like a jazz rock fusion type of a mode. Guitar players like Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, and Yngwie Malmsteen, some heavyweight guitar shredder type guitar players. The Aeolian mode is good for rock, metal, let's say Iron Maiden, Metallica, Black Sabbath, bands like that. And the Locrian is also good for like jazz rock fusion, Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen, and I'm sure many other great guitar players. Since I said that the Phrygian and the Locrian are both good for jazz rock fusion, you might say, well, if they both are, where the other 2 modes, the Dorian and the Aeolian, are kind of specific. This belongs here, this belongs here, these 2 belong here. What's the difference? Which one should I use? And that's an interesting thing to look at. Here I'll show you a comparison between the Locrian and the Phrygian. The Locrian mode and the Phrygian mode are exactly the same except for 1 note. If you watch my video on the Phrygian mode, a Phrygian mode is the same as a major scale, 2 whole steps under your key. If I'm in the key of E and I want to play Phrygian, 2 whole steps under E is C. So I can just play a C scale, which has all natural notes. Okay, but I'll just emphasize the E note, not the C note. So here's an E5 chord. Now I'm going to start on an E note, and I'm going to play all natural notes, no sharps, no flats. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. And obviously sounds like it works with that chord. Now I'll play an E Locrian mode. Again, here's the E5 chord. Here's E Locrian. They have 6 similar notes. The only difference is that the Phrygian has a natural 5th. If I'm looking at it from the perspective of E as my key center, the Locrian has a flat 5th. So here's an E Phrygian mode, 1 octave. Here's an E Locrian, 1 octave. Okay, 6 notes are the same. The only difference is The Phrygian has a natural fifth, the Locrian has a flat fifth. And if you think about those two together and then mixing them with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scales, a lot of similarities there. But that key difference between the Locrian and the Phrygian is that flat 5. That's Locrian, and that's Phrygian. But they both work really, really well in like jazz rock fusion settings, and again, like I said, heavyweight shredder guitar players, Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen, people like that. Two good choices for shredding type guitar soloing. The only difference again is the Locrian has a flat 5, the Phrygian has a natural 5. Now I'll play a little bit demonstrating the Locrian mode mixed with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scales. I'll use the key of E to demonstrate. What is it about each particular mode that gives it its unique characteristic sound? Every mode, every scale has a formula or sequence of steps that will create its unique sound. Here's a C major scale in 2 octaves, position 7. C major scale, no sharps, no flats. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, if I play the first octave for starting on C, that's a C major scale or a C Ionian mode. As I mentioned, they're synonymous. The major scale is the first mode, the Ionian mode. So again, C to C is a C Ionian mode. No sharps, no flats. If I start on the second tone, which is D, and go to the octave, the next D note, and return to the D note again, I didn't change any notes as far as sharps or flats. I just started and ended on the second degree of that scale. That's a Dorian mode. In other words, the Dorian mode is just the second mode of the major scale. And it sounds different because the sequence is different. The Ionian mode is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. The Dorian mode is whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. Each of the other modes sounds different because, as I said, the sequence of the pattern changes. So just by playing for one octave, starting on each of the successive degrees of the scale, I'll get each of these 7 modes. So here's all 7 modes. C to C is the C Ionian mode. D to D is the D Dorian mode. E to E is the E Phrygian mode. F to F is the F Lydian mode. G to G is the G Mixolydian mode. A to A is the A Aeolian mode. B to B is the B Locrian mode. And if I just do, starting the next note, I'll just repeat the octave of the Ionian. So again, you could hear each of these 7 modes sound completely different, or again has its own unique characteristic sound, because the pattern of steps, whole and half, changes. Each of the 7 modes has 5 whole steps and 2 half steps, but it's because the pattern changes. That's what gives it its own unique characteristic sound. Now, a mode can fall into one of 3 categories or types of chords that it will work with: major, minor, or dominant. To make your basic major or minor chord, you take the first, third, and fifth note of the scale, and that will create the type of chord that you will have. In other words, if I take from that C Ionian mode or C major scale, if I take the first, third, and fifth note, which is C, E, and G, that gives me a C major chord. So the C Ionian mode, or any Ionian mode, will work with a major chord. If I go from the second note, as I said, the D, and play the D Dorian, but just look at the first, third, and fifth note from here. In other words, hit a note, skip one, hit a note, skip one, play the next note, and then skip a note and hit it. So you have, that's obviously sounds minor, because that's comprising a D minor chord, D, F, and A. If I do the same thing from E, I'm playing E, G, B, which is a E minor chord. If I start from F, that's an F major chord, F, A, C. And on the G note, the Mixolydian, it sounds major, but since the Mixolydian dominant family is a 4-part chord, it's going to have the first, third, fifth, and the flat seventh to give it more of a, a dominant chord sound. Remember, the dominant chord family is the like the bluesy sounding chords, sevenths, ninths, 13ths, things like that. Okay. Anyway, each of the 7 modes has a unique sound, because if you take the triads built from each of the modes, it'll put it into its particular category. Getting into the weeds here a little bit, but the point is, each of the 7 modes belongs to one of 3 categories. The 2 major sounding modes are Ionian and Lydian. The 4 minor sounding modes are Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And the 1 dominant sounding mode is the Mixolydian. Okay, I'll get into a little bit more of this later in this video and show you, how to apply the particular mode to a particular genre. Now I'm going to play all 7 modes starting on C, and I'll be in the same position on the fingerboard, and obviously the fingering pattern is going to change because I'm going to be relating them all to the same root note, but because of the sequence of steps changing, as again, the order of the whole steps and half steps, my left hand fingering is going to have to change. Here's the first mode, Ionian. Here's the second mode, Dorian. Again, all of these are going to be C as the key center, or have C as my key center. So here's a C Dorian mode. Here's a C Phrygian mode. Here's a C Lydian mode. Here's a C Mixolydian mode. Here's a C Aeolian mode. And here's a C Locrian mode. As you can hear, all 7 modes sound quite different from each other, and again, it's because the sequence of steps, whole and half, is different for each one. So that's one way you can use the modes or learn the modes, is by learning a particular fingering pattern. But there are other ways, I'll show you as the video goes on, to think about the modes and apply them or access them in different ways and different fingering patterns. I first learned about the modes many years ago when I was giving guitar lessons in a local music shop in Queens, New York. I had never heard of the modes. I had no idea what they were. Never even heard the word modes, for that matter. I was playing like most guitar players, coming up, learn that basic pentatonic scale, the blues scale, and it would suit you well for soloing for lots of applications. Actually, the pentatonic and blues scales, you can, if that's all you ever knew, I say this to my students sometimes. If you only knew the pentatonic scales, major and minor, and never learned anything else, you can play great solos to any type of music, rock, blues, jazz, country, anything. But the modes really just, give you more options and increase, your more stuff in your musical toolbox. Anyway, I remember many, many years ago, as I said, before I knew the modes, I used to play patterns. I would hear things on records and figure things out, noodling around, and I would play notes that were not in the pentatonic scales, but I would say, hey, wow, these things sound good, but I don't know what they are. I didn't have a name for them. I just knew, like fingering, hey, okay, da-da-da-da-da, play that fingering pattern, sounds good, sounds like part of the guitar solo from, such and such a song, but again, not knowing what they were. One day, while giving lessons, I was on a break for waiting for the next student to come, and I would peruse through the music books on the shelf in the music store, as I was very hungry for knowledge. I had to learn everything I could about music. I just, again, hungry for music knowledge. So I picked up this book called Modes for Improvising. I said, that's kind of interesting. I don't know what that is, but so I opened it up, thumbed through it, and I bought the book, took it home, and that was just like a eureka moment for me. It was like my head just blew up, because I started to see that as I mentioned, the scale patterns, the things that I was playing that I didn't have a name for, now had a name. And I realized I was actually using some of the modes at the time, but I just didn't know what they were. So after spending some time with the book, I came up with sort of a way for me to think about applying the modes, and have used it pretty much ever since for myself and for students that I work with. And that idea is applying the principle of using the major scale to access a particular mode. And I'll explain here. I'll show you what I mean. When I showed you before the 7 modes based on the major diatonic scale, playing C to C, there's my C Ionian mode. When I played the second mode, D Dorian, there's my second mode. And I said, wait a minute, the D Dorian mode has the same notes as a C major scale. That's interesting, but it sounds different, obviously, than a C major scale. So I can think of the Dorian mode, since C is one whole step under D, I can think to myself, hey, I can just play a major scale one whole step under my key, and I'll have the Dorian mode. In other words, here's C major scale, here's D Dorian, same notes as the C major scale. So, and again, I said the Dorian mode is a minor sounding mode. So if I want to apply the Dorian mode, I can think to myself, just play a major scale one whole step under whatever key I want to use it in. D Dorian is the same as C major. So here's a D minor chord, and I can play a C major scale over it, but start on the D note, not the C note. And it fits perfectly. So the same concept I applied to each of the 7 modes. E, Phrygian, being the third note in from the C scale, is actually 2 whole steps higher. So if I look at it from the perspective of E, and I say from E to C, what do I have to do to get from E to C? I went 2 whole steps down, 1, 2. So I can think E Phrygian, if I'm thinking for the key of E Phrygian is the same as a C major scale. And I applied that to all of the 7 modes. So one way to look at the modes is, again, if I'm just applying them all to a particular major scale pattern. And the difference here, or the reason for this is, as I showed you earlier, I played 7 modes starting from C, but each one had a particular fingering or a different fingering pattern. If you just use the one fingering pattern for the major scale, out of that you can get each of the 7 modes within the same fingering pattern. And that's how I started to learn these modes. That's kind of clicked for me, like I said, many years ago when I started to study this book. So again, I'm going to show you now how I can apply that concept to all of the 7 modes. So if I want the Ionian mode, just play the scale that's built on the key that I'm in. If I'm in C and I want C Ionian mode, play a C major scale. If I want to play, let's say, D Dorian, a whole step under is C. So the rule for Dorian mode is play a major scale one whole step under your key. But emphasize, even though you're playing the E major scale, emphasize the second tone, the D note, the D tone. Let's say if I'm using D as an example, I'm going to play a C scale, but don't emphasize the C note, emphasize the D note, or the note of the particular mode that you're in, that you want. For the Phrygian mode, I can play a major scale 2 whole steps under my key. For Lydian mode, I can play a major scale built on the 5th of my key. For the Mixolydian mode, I can play a major scale built on the 4th of my key. For the Aeolian mode, I can play a major scale built 1.5 steps above my key. And for the Locrian mode, I can play a major scale built 1/2 step above my key. Here I'll use a couple of examples in random keys to show you how I think about applying the modes or getting to the modes by thinking about accessing them to a major scale or relating them to a particular major scale. Again, if I want to use the first mode, the C Ionian mode, let's say if I'm in the key of C, just play a C major scale. And it sounds like that, okay? Let's say I'm in the key of A minor, because again, the Dorian is a minor sounding mode. So let's say I'm playing an A minor chord, or I want to play over that, something that's going to work with that. I think just play a major scale a whole step under my key. I'm in the key of A. What's a whole step under A? G. So just play a G scale against A minor, and you'll have Dorian mode. But if I play the G scale but use the G note as the center, the note that I focus my center on, it's going to sound like a G major chord. That's not what I want. I want to play the same notes in that, use the same pattern, but focus on the second tone in that scale, which is A. Now it sounds like it belongs to that A minor chord, okay? So, rule of thumb, Dorian mode, play a major scale 1 whole step under your key. If you're in A minor, play a G scale. If you're in E minor, play a D scale. If you're in B flat, play an A flat scale. But focus, when you get to that scale, in other words, when you move the whole step down, don't focus on the key note of the major scale as your root note. Focus on the second tone in that major scale, because the second tone of the major scale is the Dorian mode. Hope that makes sense. Okay, Phrygian mode. I'll use E as an example, and again the Phrygian mode is also a minor sounding mode. Here's an E minor chord, here's an E note, my root. The rule of thumb for the Phrygian mode is to play a major scale 2 whole steps under your key. If I'm in the key of E, what's 2 whole steps under E? C. So I'm in E minor, but I'm going to play a C major scale. Now if I play the C major scale and emphasize from the C note, sounds like Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. But the same scale pattern, but instead of emphasizing the root note C, I'm going to emphasize the third note E, because that's the Phrygian mode, is the third mode of the major scale. So here's a C major scale, or the notes in the C major scale, but starting and ending on E. And it sounds like an E minor chord. So that's how that would work. The rule for the Lydian mode is to play a major scale built on the 5th of your key. Okay? Let's say, for an example, if I'm in the key of C, and again, the Lydian mode is a major sounding mode. So here's a C chord. If I play a C major scale, it sounds like it belongs to that, but it's an Ionian mode. If I play a G scale over that, here's a G scale. Sounds like a G major scale or G major chord, but if I just start on the 4th tone of the G major scale, which is C, and now play the G major scale but starting on the C note, now it sounds like the C chord, okay? So the rule of thumb again for the using the Lydian mode is play a major scale built on the 5th of your key. Next mode is Mixolydian. The rule for this is play a major scale built on the 4th of your key. Again, if I'm in the key of C, what's the 4th of C? F. So I'll play an F scale over C, and I will have Mixolydian mode. Here's an F scale. It sounds like, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do when I apply it to the F chord. But if I start on the C note, like I said, it will sound like this. And has that dominant sound because the Mixolydian is your dominant sounding mode. So the rule of thumb for that is whatever key you're in, if you want Mixolydian mode, play a major scale built on the 4th of your key. Aeolian mode. The Aeolian mode is the natural minor scale. Now, like the Ionian mode, the first mode is the major scale. The 6th mode, the Aeolian, is the natural minor scale. Okay? If you've ever heard the term or the phrase relative major minor, that's when you can have, or actually every key is actually 2 keys in one. A major key and a minor key can share the same notes, kind of like 2 sides of the same coin. For example, C major has no sharps or flats. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. If I start on the 6th tone of the C scale, which is A, and play also all natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, I have now an A Aeolian mode, or an A natural minor scale. Here's C to C, C major scale. Here's A natural minor, C major, A minor. So that phrase relative major minor means every key is actually 2 keys in one. It's which note you use as the key center to consider the the root note of the scale. 2 sides of the same coin. C major scale has all natural notes. A minor scale has all natural notes, and that of course applies for any key. And that's how the Aeolian mode will work here, what I'm just about to show you. Using B as an example, B Aeolian mode, which is a natural minor scale, I can think of, flip that coin over, and B minor is actually the same as D major. So to get from B to D, I went 1.5 steps up, or 3 frets. So the rule for the Aeolian mode is you can play a major scale built 1 1/2 steps up above your key. If I'm in the key of B minor and I want to play the Aeolian mode, but thinking of it again as applying it to a major scale, 1.5 steps above B is D. So I'll just play a D scale, or the notes in the D scale. There's a D major scale. Sounds like a D major chord, but if I use the B as my key center, same notes, but the key center shifted. I like to think of it in terms of like the key center is like the, let's say like the sun, and the other notes in the scale are like the planets revolving around the sun. So depending on which note you use as the key center, those planets or those other notes revolving around that will create a different sound, again because the sequence of steps, what I did to get from one note to the next to construct that. And the 7th mode is the Locrian mode, and the rule of thumb for that is play a major scale 1/2 step above your key. Let's say I'm in the key of E. 1/2 step above E is F. So if I'm in the key of E and I want to apply the Locrian mode or use the Locrian mode, I just think what's a half step above E? F. So I'll just play an F scale. Now here's an F scale. Sounds like, again, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But if I start and stop on the 7th degree, which is E, it's going to sound like this. Okay, I just played the same notes as in an F scale, but using E as my key center, or now E is the sun, and the notes are revolving around that. If F is the sun, and the same notes revolving around it, will create this sound when F is the key center. When E is the key center, same notes, but the key center, now like I said, the sun, using that analogy, is now the center, and the way the notes revolve around that particular center is going to change the particular characteristic sound of that mode, because again, the sequence of steps have changed. So to review, if you want to play the Ionian mode, play a major scale where the root note is the same as the key that you're in, or the chord that you're in. You want C Ionian, play C major. For Dorian, play a major scale one whole step under your key. If you're in E, E Dorian is D, D major. If you're in C, C Dorian is B flat major. For the Phrygian mode, two whole steps under your key. If I'm in the key of E and I want a Phrygian mode, play a C scale, because C is two whole steps under E. If I'm in the key of G and I want Lydian mode, play a D scale, because the Lydian mode, the rule for that is to play a scale a fifth above your key. For Mixolydian, play a major scale built a fourth above your key. If I'm in the key of E, play an A scale, because A is the fourth of E. If I'm in the key of G, play a C scale. And by the way, the interesting thing about the Mixolydian mode applies to harmonica, or harp as we call it. Like for, if you're playing blues, let's say playing Roadhouse Blues in the key of E, and somebody wants to play a harmonica to it, they need to use an A harp, not an E harp, because if they use the harmonica where the key is the same as the key that you're playing in a blues situation, not good, because you're going to have a clash with the natural seventh and the flat seventh. So with harmonica, as I said, it's the same kind of rule, because the Mixolydian mode gives you the blues sound, if you will, because it has a flat seventh. I'll get into that a little bit later in this video. So for all you harmonica players out there, if you're in the key of E, use an A harp. If you're in the key of B flat, use an E flat harp. And if you don't, not good. The rule for the Aeolian mode is you can play a major scale built 1 1/2 steps up above your key. If I'm in the key of B minor and I want to play the Aeolian mode, but thinking of it again as applying it to a major scale, 1 1/2 steps above B is D. So I'll just play a D scale, or the notes in the D scale. There's a D major scale. Sounds like a D major chord, but if I use the B as my key center, same notes, but the key center shifted. The final mode is the Locrian mode, and that's playing a major scale 1/2 step above your key. If you're in the key of E, play an F scale. If you're in the key of F, play an F sharp scale. If you're in the key of E flat, play an E scale, and you'll get that sound of the Locrian mode. But again, as with all the 7 modes, applying that principle of the using it a major scale, to access it, you have to use the key note, not the key note of the major scale, except for the first Ionian mode, the first mode. For all the others, if you're using this principle, for Dorian, highlight the second note. For Phrygian, highlight the third note. For Lydian, highlight the fourth note, and so on and so on and so on. And that's a way to access the modes, by applying them to the major scale pattern. And again, the difference with this is if you just know one pattern for a major scale, you can access all 7 modes just starting on that particular note that you want. Now, as I just showed you, one way to access the modes is to just use a major scale and apply the principle of whatever distance you're traveling from the key that you're in. Again, if you are in the key, let's say you're in A and you want the Dorian mode, you play a whole step under, which would be a G major scale. If you're in, let's say, C and you want Mixolydian mode, you play major scale built on the fourth, which is F. And like I said, I just went through the 7 modes, how to access them that way. There's another way that you can access or think about the modes, and that's in terms of thinking them relating to either the first mode, which is Ionian, or the major scale, and the sixth mode, the Aeolian, which is the natural minor scale. Because remember, there are three chord categories: major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. The major type chords would have the natural third and a natural seventh. The minor type chords have a flat third and a flat seventh, and the dominant chord type family has a natural third and a flat seventh. So there are two major modes, or two major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian. Here's a C Ionian mode. C major scale, C Ionian mode. If I want to play a Lydian mode in the key of C, as I showed you earlier, I could think of play a major scale built on the fifth, which is G. If I look at a G scale, what is it unique about a G scale? It has an F sharp in it. Now if I go back to my C Ionian mode, and I have all natural notes, but if I want to turn this into a Lydian mode, I can sharp the fourth, make the F sharp, and that would be the same as playing a G scale, but starting and ending on C. So a C Lydian, or any Lydian mode, is a major scale with a raised fourth. Here's a C major scale, C Ionian mode. If I raise that fourth tone from F to F sharp, okay, the F sharp means that I'm now really playing the same notes that are in a G scale, because a G scale, the key of G, has an F sharp. So a way to think of the Lydian mode is a major scale with a raised fourth. You see Lydian, and that one note right, kind of has kind of a haunting, at least that's how it sounds to me, like a haunting type of a characteristic sound to it. So here's a C major chord, C Ionian mode. Sounds like it belongs, but if I raise the fourth, now I have, if I play a C major 7 sharp 11 chord, because the sharp 11th is an octave higher than the sharp 4th, that F sharp note changes everything. You know, a whole different characteristic sound. So, two major sounding modes, Ionian, which is the major scale, and Lydian, which is a major scale with a raised fourth. Just take any major scale, raise the fourth tone, and you have a Lydian mode. I'll apply that same principle to the minor modes. There are four minor modes. If I take, for example, because I was using the key of C major, and I said that, you know, relative major minor concept, flip the coin over. C major is the same as A minor. So here's an A natural minor scale, or an A Aeolian mode. It's the natural minor scale, the sixth mode, all natural notes. Okay, one of the other four minor modes is the Dorian mode. Now another way I could think of the Dorian mode, or access that, is taking the natural minor scale and raising the sixth tone. Okay, here's an A Aeolian mode, right? So if I'm in the key of A and I want to play the Dorian mode, A Dorian, as I said earlier, is the same as G major. G major has an F sharp in it. A Dorian has an F sharp. Here's an A natural minor scale. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Sounds like an A minor chord. But if I want to use the Dorian mode, as I said, one of the other ways to look at it is just play the natural minor scale, the Aeolian mode, and raise the sixth tone. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth tone of A minor is F. If I sharp that to F sharp, I just played an A Dorian mode, because like I said earlier, A Dorian is the same as G major. G major has an F sharp in it. So since A natural minor has no sharps or flats, if I wanted to turn it into an A Dorian mode, I can sharp the sixth tone. So take a minor scale, sharp the sixth tone, you have a Dorian mode. Another one of the minor modes is the Phrygian mode, and a way to access the Phrygian mode, applying it with, or looking at it from the same idea of accessing it from a natural minor scale, is a natural minor scale with a flat second. Okay, A Phrygian is the same as an F major scale. Remember, I said earlier, the Phrygian mode is 2 whole steps under your key. 2 whole steps under A is F. An F scale, or the key of F, has a B flat right there. So if I go to the Aeolian Mode, or A natural minor scale, and say, hey, where's that B note? It's my second tone. I flat it. Instead of A, B, C, I got A, B flat, C. And so 1 flat and the rest natural. Here's an A natural minor scale, or A Aeolian Mode. All natural notes. Now if I flat the second tone and to make B, B flat, sound like this. There's your Phrygian mode. Another way of thinking about it. A natural minor scale with a flat second. And the Locrian mode, another way to look at the Locrian mode, is a natural minor scale with a flat second and a flat fifth. Here's A natural minor. Now if I flat the second tone, which is B, and the fifth tone, which is E, and play B flat and E flat instead, I'm going to have an A Locrian mode. Now, what's interesting here to see as well is I just showed you the Phrygian mode is like a natural minor scale with a flat second, and the Locrian mode is like a natural minor scale with a flat second and a flat fifth. So the Phrygian, if I'm playing Phrygian and I just want to turn that into Locrian, flat the fifth of the Phrygian, and now I have Locrian. And what's interesting about that is I'll show you in a little bit when we connect these two pentatonic and blues scales, how that can kind of tie in. Okay, a Mixolydian mode falls into the dominant chord category, and only one mode fits into that. Again, there are 2 major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian, 4 minor modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian, and 1 dominant sounding mode, the Mixolydian, for your bluesy sounding chords, 7ths, 9s, and, all those kind of chords like that. The Mixolydian mode is a major scale with a flat 7th. Here's C Ionian Mode, a C major scale. And sounds like C major. If I flat the 7th of C, the 7th tone of C is B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I flat that and play B flat instead, you can hear clearly that it sounds like a dominant sounding chord. So the Mixolydian mode is a major scale or an Ionian mode with a flat 7th. And again, as I said earlier, that's, works with that whole idea of when you're playing harmonica or harp in a blues situation, you want to use the Mixolydian mode because the Mixolydian mode has the flat 7th, and that's what gives it that bluesier sound, if you will. So to summarize what I just went over, another way to access the modes by relating them to either the major scale, which is the Ionian mode, or the natural minor scale, which is the Aeolian mode. Being that there are 2 major modes, the Ionian mode is the major scale, the Lydian mode is a major scale with a raised 4th. There are 4 minor modes. The Aeolian mode is the natural minor scale. The Dorian mode is a natural minor scale with a raised 6th tone. The Phrygian mode is a natural minor scale with a flat 2nd tone. The Locrian mode is a natural minor scale with a flat 2nd and a flat 5th tone. And the Mixolydian mode is a major scale or an Ionian mode with a flat 7th degree. So that's another way to access all 7 modes, or another way to, think about them. When using the modes for different applications, such as soloing, improvising, maybe creating lines for original music, you can always mix them up with the correct pentatonic and or blues scales for more options. And when I say the correct, remember there were only two types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and two types of blues scales, major and minor. And the blues scales are kind of like offshoots of the pentatonic scales. Here's a C major pentatonic scale. It's a 5-tone scale, hence the name penta. Okay. Done. That's the scale. And I'll just continue on with other octaves. But second octave. Okay. So here's a C major pentatonic across 6 strings. Sounds like a C chord. If I add in this E flat note, which acts as a passing tone between the second and third tone of the scale, I'm turning this into a C major blues scale. Still sounds like C, right? But if I sit on this passing tone, it's going to clash with the major chord that I'm, aligning it up with. A C major chord has an E natural. This passing tone is an E flat. It's going to clash with that. But if I use it just like I said as a passing tone, it's a smooth transition, and you just get this nice little bridge between those two notes, and it will work. Right? Okay. The same goes with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues. Here's an A minor pentatonic, a 5-tone scale. Probably the first scale you learn. That goes for me as well. When you first start out, that's your sort of first rock scale or blues scale that you learn, so you can play some solos. If I add that same tone, that E flat, into this scale, this minor pentatonic, now it's a passing tone between the 4th and the 5th degree of the scale, but it still works nicely. Okay? And the fact that it sits in both of these, the C major pentatonic and the A minor pentatonic, that it sits well as a passing tone in both of those scales. It goes back to, remember I talked earlier about the relative major minor concept. A C Ionian mode, or a C major scale, has all natural notes. Flip that to the other side of the coin, an A minor scale, or an A natural minor scale, which is the Aeolian mode, also has no sharps and no flats, all natural notes. So C major, A minor are related in that regard. Same with the pentatonics and the blues. C major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic, C major blues, A minor blues. Okay, you have that relationship, relative major minor. The fact that there were only 2 pentatonic scales, major and minor, and 2 blues scales, major and minor, and there are 3 categories, regarding the modes, mixing them up with the correct pentatonic and the correct blues scale is what you want to be able to do. The 2 major sounding modes again are the Ionian and the Lydian, so you can play Ionian mode, Lydian mode, and also mix them up with major pentatonic and or major blues. There are 4 minor modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. You can mix those up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues. And the one mode that kind of stands on its own is the Mixolydian, and the Mixolydian mode being like your bluesy sounding mode that works with bluesy chords, sevenths, ninths, thirteens, all the chords in the dominant family. The interesting thing about the Mixolydian mode is it will mix up with both major and minor pentatonic scales and major and minor blues scales. So both pentatonics and both blues will mix with the Mixolydian. That's the only mode that has that attribute. With the other 6 modes, you can only mix them up with either a major pentatonic and a major blues, or a minor pentatonic and a minor blues. Otherwise, you're going to hear some bad stuff that you don't want to hear. clams. Buddy Rich used to refer to bad notes as clams. A little trivia for you there. Okay, so again, when you're mixing the modes with the pentatonic scale, make sure you're using the correct pentatonic and or blues scale. But with the Mixolydian mode, you don't have to consider that. They'll both work. Okay. The difference is in the the Mixolydian mode, when you or in the blues category, if you're using the major pentatonic or major blues, it's going to sound like it belongs to that, or okay, it's going to sound like it belongs to that as well. Because when you're playing blues, you're really playing usually minor pentatonic type scales, minor blues scales, but the major pentatonics and the major blues scales, again, will work with the Mixolydian mode. So mess around with this stuff, use your ears, and your ears will really tell you what works and what doesn't. Now, since there are two major type modes, four minor type modes, and one dominant type mode, you may ask, well, which one should I use in a particular situation, in a specific music genre? The dominant, obviously, there's nothing to consider because there's only one of them, just one dominant mode, the Mixolydian mode, and that will work for your dominant family chords, 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, 13th, what have you. Mixolydian mode, you're good to go. There are two major type modes, Ionian and Lydian. Both will work in the major chord family. Here's a C major chord, here's a C Ionian mode. It's going to match that chord, or major 7ths, it's going to work with any of those chords, anything in the major family. The Lydian mode, being that it has a raised fourth, it's an Ionian mode with a raised fourth, right? So it has, instead of an F, it has an F sharp. You may want to alter the chord, but it still sits in the major family. Like, in other words, here's a C major 7th chord. If I change that G, if I just make it a sharp fourth, an F sharp, C major 7, flat 5, now it's going to match with that. Or a C major 7 sharp 11 chord, that F sharp note really sticks out, that sharp 4. So Lydian mode will really sit nicely over a chord like that. Okay, 4 minor modes. Again, this is just an opinion. The Dorian mode works well with jazz, let's say rock, jazz rock, but not really metal so much, or fusion music so much, if you will. Let's say guitar players like Carlos Santana, Duane Allman, Dickie Betts, on those extended jams, like Elizabeth Reed, Whipping Post, that the Allman Brothers were very well known for, and of course in a minor key. Let's say you have just a chord cycle, A minor 7. That was the Dorian mode. I'm in A minor. That was an A Dorian mode. Sits really nice. Okay, so Dorian mode will sit nicely in that type of genre, rock, not too heavy, jazz rock, if you will, in a minor key, of course. Sound like Carlos Santana, you're good to go. Phrygian is more suited for like fusion, like my shredding fusion type stuff. There's your Phrygian mode, okay? Again, A minor. So Phrygian, great for shredding, like, Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen, definitely make use of the Phrygian mode. The Aeolian mode is your natural minor scale, and good for metal and bands like Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Metallica. Of course, if you're playing in a minor key or just heavy music like with power chords, the Aeolian mode is a perfect scale, a perfect mode to use for that. And of course mixed in with the minor pentatonic, minor blues scales. And the Locrian mode is also good for in my opinion, you know, fusion type, you know, jazz rock fusion, shredding, high-speed shredding type stuff. Okay, works with that. And I said earlier that the Phrygian mode is good for jazz rock fusion, and the Locrian is good for jazz rock fusion as well. And you might say, well, you know, well, which one? Okay, and they both will work well in that genre. And if you look at the two together, there's a comparison that's nice to see. Here's an A Phrygian mode. Okay, here's an A Locrian mode. The difference is, if I compare those two, the Locrian is like a Phrygian mode with a flat 5. Here's a Phrygian mode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I flat that fifth tone, here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have a Locrian mode. So they both sit well in that genre. And what's also interesting to see here, remember I said that because these are minor modes, they can mix with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scale. Remember, the minor blues scale has that flat fifth in there, so that flat fifth is seen in the minor pentatonic, and it's also seen in the Locrian mode. So just, you know, interesting comparisons between the two scales when you see notes that, like, you know, overlap. Okay. The Mixolydian mode, as I said, there's nothing to consider, like which one should I use or not, because again, the Mixolydian mode is the only dominant mode, and that will work in your dominant family of chords, sevenths, ninths, whatever, you know, your bluesy sounding chords, or, you know, funk music. You know, play a ninth chord, use the Mixolydian mode, and you'll, you know, have some nice things that you can draw from. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please leave any questions or comments in the comments section below. I'm Dan Beagleman, and those are the 7 modes based on the major diatonic scale. Have a nice day.